all these people conducting this seance were bringing in these 9 maybe extraterrestrial beings, maybe beings that go to the 9 Egyptian gods, but it's like a council.
He really was a genuine believer.
I'm Andrea Puharich. I'm a physician by training, research scientist by choice.
We have tape recordings of him meditating in the king's chamber.
What?
And they brought through this information. Apparently they're channeling this Egyptian god.
And there are specifically 9 Egyptian gods.
So he gets this call of metallic voice. That was some sort of, alien intelligence. This is what, you hear a lot about this with the UFO abduction stuff. Like these people weren't looking to be in the spotlight. It took about 2 years for me to basically earn the trust of these space kids. It's like Stranger Things in real life.
One neat solution that would explain everything away would be mind control, right?
Delgado implanted radio receivers in the heads of bulls.
Delgado has remote control of the animal.
You have a guy who's being able to play the bull like a video game.
I'm revealing for the first time a lot of things that even my closest working colleagues do not know.
There's reason to believe Puharich may have been a double agent. He says it.
Really?
Tape.
This is one of the craziest interviews I've ever done, man.
Ignition sequence start. How is this possible?
Nothing too unusual about that.
Their existence cannot longer be denied.
I'm here with Greg Malazzi. This has been a long time coming. We've had a lot of interesting offline conversations. You made an amazing documentary called Mind Traveler about this very mysterious mid-century scientist named Andrea Puharich, who is like this Zelig of American conspiracies. He's this architect of MK Ultra and early CIA mind control techniques, but also seems to be channeling aliens through what he calls the space kids, this like collection of kids who he recruits who are psychic. He's the inspiration for Star Trek, incidentally. Like, he is one of the most interesting people I've ever encountered. And you've made this amazing documentary on him. So I just can't wait to dive into this. And I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So give me a little bit about the origin story for Andrei Puharich. Who is he, and how did he come to be one of these kind of renegade spooky scientists involved in mind control?
I guess you could start it at Northwestern University. He went there. He was a medical student. I think he started in 1947. And so he was there doing all sorts of stuff with the nervous system. He was very interested in that, and he was doing like normal medical training. And he was actually part of the Army Specialized Training Program. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's this special program where basically they recruit students who they believe could be, useful to whatever they're planning on doing in certain categories of the Army, whether it be medical, so forth. He was a medical doctor, and he was part of this program. It's very strange. Kissinger was part of this program.
Really?
A bunch of other weird people. Kurt Vonnegut, the author.
What?
Yeah, you could look it up. It's really weird. So he was part of that. Basically, it was like sort of a recruiting program, and they saw something in him all the way back in 1947 when he was a medical student. And he very rarely, in fact, I've never even heard him mention this in all the stuff I've listened to and read about him. So for whatever reason, he didn't talk about it. And that could have been his first, step into that world, the military world. But that happened when he was a medical student, like way before the Roundtable Foundation, the first lab he had, or anything like that. So
what did this military program, this Army program involve?
You can, even on Wikipedia, there's not much about it, but I think it was more like looking at certain institutions, certain places for people who are special. I mean, Army specialized training, you know, and he was considered special at that time for what he was doing, and they just saw something in him, and he was brought into that program. I don't know what it did exactly, or, you know, what, like, the day-to-day or anything, but he was part of it, as well as, like, again, a list of other people, like, in all areas, right? Again, Kurt Vonnegut, the author, like, all these people
It's crazy.
were a part of that.
Where was he a medical student?
Northwestern, Chicago, which, you know, is a very prestigious school.
Absolutely. Yeah. Evanston. And I think also Jalen Hynek was, as astronomer Blue Book was Northwestern too. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's in the Chicago suburbs and he's a medical student. How does he get into like telepathy and mind control and things like that?
I came up with a theory of the nervous system that I called the Puharich theory. I visualized the nervous system as being embedded in the cell tissue of the body, just as the roots of a tree are embedded in the ground, which gives it nourishment. But the tree also has a similar network radiating into the sky. Perhaps man does as well, and he too gains nourishment through a touchless process. And if dynamics can be transferred, why can't thoughts?
So he was, a medical student, and there's a guy also at Northwestern at the time named Warren S. McCullough. Do you know who that is?
No, who's that?
You could do an episode on him. He's like, a Puharich on steroids, sort of, back then at least. But he was this very far out researcher into basically ESP stuff back then. He was very interested in, like, altering drugs, psychedelic drugs, mind-altering stuff.
For the audience, ESP is extrasensory perception.
Yes, extrasensory perception. So he was at Northwestern, this guy McCullough. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But he sort of took Puharich under his wing, and from what I understand, was the first person who introduced him to, whatever weird science, if you want to call it that, because he was one of these guys, McCullough, who would, on his off time do all these like strange experiments with radio frequencies and that kind of stuff. And I think, like, in the academic setting, he had to, put on a suit and tie and, like, not talk about that, basically. But he also was very involved in intelligence stuff. Like, he was always getting sort of, like, we have letters from, like, CIA and stuff back then, who were kind of going to him with questions and so forth. McCullough, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he actually, there was an archive in, I think it wasn't Northwestern, it was some bizarre archive I found years ago making the film. And, I know you had Annie Jacobson on, like, she's in the film, and she was trying to find records on McCullough because, he's really interesting. He was part of the Puharich story. And somehow we found this, like, big stash of archives of his that, again, were these letters from CIA and the Navy and everything, sort of, I guess, wanting to recruit him. But in those letters, there were letters from McCullough back to these agencies saying, you should check this guy Puharich out. I work with him. He's young. He's very smart. And he was older, like much older than Puharich at that time. I think he was probably, like, in his 70s or 80s or something. So, he passed on. But basically that, I think, triggered Puharich to get very interested in the subject. So he became almost, like, obsessed with it. And he sort of had this moment back then where he's like, I'm either going to choose the traditional academic path, or I'm going to choose the, path of ESP, telepathy. And he talks very openly about, like, making that choice.
I was unexpectedly put in contact with Henry A. Wallace, vice president under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was impressed by my quest for the existence of telepathy and granted me a large sum of money. Additional benefactors emerged, including the heirs to two of the wealthiest families in the world, the Astors and the DuPonts.
I was able to get a barn. I started working in the dead of winter in 48 in Maine. We lived in a big 50 room house on the seashore, which was a lab and residence and so on. It was called the Roundtable Foundation.
And so he opens the Roundtable Foundation. So there's a lot going on with how that even opened, because it's a huge lab. It's like a massive barn. It's on the coast of Maine, Rockland, Maine, it's called. So, it's this huge place. He's got like a staff, all. And the thing with Puharich, I learned, like, he tells a different story of how the Roundtable started and how we got the money and everything to what we kind of figured out was really going on.
What'd you figure out?
Well, it was all, government funded at that time.
Who funded? It was the CIA or?
Everyone. Army, Navy, CIA, something called the something Armor Foundation that was somehow tied into the Army, but basically any of those places back then. I mean, we have letters of all of them. You get Army, you name it. I mean, they were just like flocking to this place, basically giving him money to do research. And this was 49, 50, very early.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And you think their preliminary interest was mind control, telepathy, anything beyond the purview of kind of normal materialist reductionist physics that might be able to be weaponized or confer a tactical advantage to the United States? Or
it's complex, but yes, the short answer is yes. But I think obviously there was an interest in ESP and in what he was doing, and in this idea of, okay, what if this is real? I mean, he speaks a lot, and we uncovered like hundreds of tape recordings of his that no one's ever heard. And so, he talks a lot about, like, they were just obsessed at that time with, like, what if this were real? What are the implications? What if somebody could basically remote view? I mean, he was doing remote viewing, and this is something, like, I don't think is really out there, like, way before SRI, 70s, like, we're talking early 50s.
Whoa.
He's basically doing what would be considered remote viewing.
Do you think Hal Puthoff was aware of Puharich's kind of foundation that he set with remote viewing? Because the story is that, official American remote viewing kind of started with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and Stanford Research Institute.
I'm not trying to make bold statements, but that's not, true. If you're looking at it from a, like, research, when did this start? Because we have, like, all of the Roundtable research, which is so much. I mean, even all the time we spent on the film, I still haven't looked at it all, but they basically detail the experiments going on, which were, your classic ESP stuff, like the cards, all that. But no, they were doing, like, what would exactly the definition of, like, remote viewing. And so, I think the intelligence community, so forth, were just very intrigued with what was going on there.
So it's a combination of kind of, these military factions and then these kind of blue-blooded elites.
Yeah.
Sort of. And what exactly is going on there? So who is he recruiting to do these experiments, and what sort of experiments is he running at the Roundtable Foundation?
So
I want to take a moment to thank one of today's sponsors, ZBiotics. I've been using their pre-alcohol product for years, and when the opportunity came up to work with them, I jumped at it because it's one of the few things I actually drink before a night out with friends when it's time to celebrate a special event. And that little decision I make before I go out changes everything. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to specifically tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for the rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night, of course drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. I have ZBiotics before my first drink of the night, and I wake up feeling totally normal the next morning. As you'll know, if you're older than, say, the age of 28 or 29 is not usual. So go to ZBiotics.com/Jesse to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Jesse at checkout. ZBiotics is also backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/Jesse and use the code Jesse at checkout for 15% off. What exactly is going on there? So who is he recruiting to do these experiments, and what sort of experiments is he running at the Roundtable Foundation?
So again, it started with a lot of just basic ESP stuff. Can somebody pick up on what's written on a letter in the other room? A lot of, like the card guessing. And then he obviously built a Faraday cage there. And I think, was one of the first people, as far as I understand, doing ESP tests in a Faraday cage, where basically he would like put people who claimed to be psychic in the cage. And it was his belief that could sort of, block out anything from the outside, and it would really help the psychic focus and be able to do what they could do.
And he had, Aldous Huxley would go to the Roundtable Foundation, right? And obviously Aldous Huxley is known probably best for a lot of his science fiction work, but also, The Doors of Perception, where he talks about his experience with mescaline. And then, if you really get into the maybe deeper kind of architectures of his thinking, like in perennial philosophy, he's like clearly this kind of deep esotericist. And so he was hanging out at the Roundtable Foundation too? Yeah,
they were good friends. In fact, on Puharich's book, The Sacred Mushroom, which is how I got into this whole thing. I had read that book when I was much younger, and I was really interested in all that stuff. And, what's the book? DMT, the spirit molecule. And, I was really into that. And I came across The Sacred Mushroom, Puharich's book, which is very interesting. Have you read that?
I haven't read it. Yeah, I think I have it, but I haven't read it. Yeah.
The premise is basically, and this was also the research he was doing at the Roundtable, was taking a certain type of mushroom, in this instance, the Amanita muscaria, gives people ESP abilities, and they did extensive research on that there. But on the cover of that book, Aldous Huxley gives a blurb for Puharich and calls him, the greatest mind in parapsychology. But they were good friends. He was there all the time. Again, very interested in what he was doing. Really thought Puharich was like onto something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and the Amanita muscaria mushroom is a very interesting mushroom. It's the kind of archetypal, emoji on all of our, cell phones or iPhones at least. But it also, I believe, John Marco Allegro, who was a scholar of various ancient languages, he came to the very heretical conclusion that the Eucharist itself was an Amanita muscaria mushroom. And so the actual transubstantiation involved this like mushroom, and that maybe what Jesus underwent was some sort of kind of pagan mystery ritual that allowed him to sort of gain the magical powers that he achieved in the Book of Acts, and that whole thing had some kind of hermetic meaning that isn't just maybe a literal reincarnation or something. And so that I assume that must have, because I think the name of his book is similar. It's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross or something. So was there maybe some influence there with Puharich?
I'm sure there was. From what I understand, when Puharich's book came out, it was it's now sort of like a cult classic, but at the time it was like controversial, because basically people just didn't believe in what he was writing.
Yeah.
And that, I think, kind of kickstarted the, way people looked at Puharich as being, kind of like a kook.
Yeah.
But he clearly wasn't.
Clearly. But he also was he was kind of a pioneer and had a few peers who were also at the forefront of their fields. People like Albert Hoffman, Karl Ruck, and Stanislav Grof, who thought of themselves as creating what they called the new Eleusis, based on kind of, past mystery rituals, the Eleusinian mystery rituals.
Yeah.
And they involved ergot and psychedelic substances and, these sort of, Persephone's quest style. You go down, you descend to the underworld, and you come back up, and you gain knowledge of your primordial soul. And so Puharich was, he was amidst this backdrop. He was sort of on his come up, which maybe isn't a coincidence.
We are the positive principles of cosmos. We penetrate, visit persons. We work through this body, but it is under our control. We nine and our will.
The very first time that Andre heard about the Nine was through Dr. Vinod.
I've never seen people like this that I've studied. Dr. Vinod had become a channel for a civilization somewhere out there from outer space. It's so alien to our thinking, we can't even comprehend it. They call themselves, these beings, the Nine. I said, what is the Nine? They said, well, it's hard to explain to you. We're not personalities, as you think of personalities. We're more like laws or principles of the universe.
The part of Puharich's story where I think things sort of change in his life is when, this instance happens, when they first channel the Nine, which was in 52. And it is correct. All these people were there. Again, these were people who were like benefactors who were interested in what he was doing. But it all started with this guy, Vinod. You may have heard this name. He was an Indian psychic. He came to the Roundtable again through recommendation of somebody Puharich was working with. And the story goes, he shows up in Maine, goes to the Roundtable Foundation, and the first night he's there, he just unexpectedly falls into a trance. And, they're like, what's going on here? Someone grabs a tape recorder, which we have the tapes of. And he goes into a trance and he just starts speaking, saying, we are the Nine, and where we're coming through to you now, and just kind of on and on and on about a lot of philosophical New Age sort of stuff, basically. I mean, it's really, really, it's a lot. I mean, there's thousands of pages, literally, of transcripts of what they recorded with him. But that's how the story goes of how the Nine first appears, basically this guy Vinod. But mostly Vinod. So the interesting thing about this guy, Dr. Vinod was his name. He was friends with Gandhi, right? They were really close. So this was something I learned like way later into the process of the film, because this was as it took like almost 10 years, and it was mostly because these new facts and things would just like come up that I never knew, or somebody would say, hey, have you seen this? And so Vinod, like, I only really discovered a couple of years into it, but he was an interesting guy. And he was on a tour at the time in the United States, going to like Rotary clubs and dinner parties, like lecturing about theosophy and spiritualism and all sorts of stuff like that. And it is very, very little information on this guy. I mean, we tried to dig up like everything we possibly could, but that's what we know about him. He was a professor at university in Bombay. And again, with Puharich, like, he never mentions any of that. His version of the story is this guy, they just randomly came in and fell into a trance, no context, never mentions it. So that begins this like, okay, what's really going on here? Because he clearly has a background that's interesting that he just never mentioned. And then when Vinod leaves eventually, I think 54, he goes back and it never talks about him again. There was this huge moment in his life. The Nine first comes through this guy, and he just sort of like never talks about it. I think that's where the conspiracy starts, as far as what people believe to be like, I guess, a psyop. I mean,
right.
We don't have to get into that now, but
no, I want to get into the psyop elements of it. But it sounds like fundamentally he's a believer in extrasensory perception, psychic abilities, right? He's not cynical about those things, or is he? Puharich, yeah.
No, yeah, that's, I think, a big question. And even now, I always think, but I mean, yeah, there's just no question he was interested in that.
Yeah,
And
and earnestly, or do you think it was some front?
earnestly,
for like,
yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
because
for sure.
what's
Yeah.
and we'll get into this in a little bit, but that there are also possible prosaic explanations around exotic electromagnetic wavelengths that can cause, thoughts to be implanted in people and stuff, which is nuts.
Yeah.
But I think he wouldn't reduce everything to that. Would be my
No.
rough understanding personally.
No.
Yeah.
So, no, definitely not. Yeah, there's a lot to get into there, but basically, so what did the Nine say?
Yes.
And so again, it's a lot. So I have to give a shout out to Dick Russell.
Yeah,
Dick Russell.
I do.
So he's awesome.
Great guy.
And he's written some amazing books.
Mhm.
And so he was friends with this woman, Marianne Shenefield, this, allegedly amazing psychic. She passed away, but I got to know Dick, and he said, I met Puharich once. In fact, I tape recorded an interview with him. It was 94, literally the year before Puharich died / was found dead mysteriously. But he recorded an interview with him because at the time Dick Russell was wanting to write like a definitive book about MK Ultra, and he wanted to interview these people involved in it. In fact, he has one of the only interviews, as far as I know, with Sidney Gottlieb. He spent a whole day with him. He literally told me, just showed up at his house and said, "Hey, yes or no, will you let me interview you?" And he said yes. And so he has that. So this was part of that research he was doing for a book. But
just for the audience, real quick, because I know we're getting into what the Nine said.
Yeah.
But Sidney Gottlieb was known as the kind of U.S. version of Joseph Mengele, a poisoner in chief, an architect of MK Ultra from the technical staff services. So that's wild. Dick Russell spent a whole day with him.
Yeah.
So what are the Nine saying?
So yeah, it's a lot of the sort of usual, I guess, channeling talk where there's this idea that there's been this surveillance of Earth, and that they've been monitoring Earth, and they've been seeing the negative things happening. They've been seeing wars, they've been seeing nuclear weapons, and they're wanting to help, basically. The general message is this idea that they are wanting to help the human race, basically not destroy itself. This, goes on way through the 70s when Puharich, the Nine, come back. But it was basically a lot of, trying to help humanity. It was a lot of like, you've probably heard a lot about how sometimes these channelers are, what is it called? Like remote writing, when someone's in a
automatic.
Yeah, automatic writing. There was a lot of like very complex equations that would come through. That would the Nine, meaning Vinod in a trance, speaking as the Nine. A lot of like, write this down because you'll understand later what it means, sort of stuff. And we have this notebook that he wrote everything in. It's really. I mean, maybe, I'm sure you might know somebody who could look at this. I mean, I'm just making the film. I mean, I'm very...
Well, we should see if any of it checks with actual science or math.
It's crazy. They would say, the Nine, they would say, okay, look, you're contacting us through a psychic, but if you want a clearer feed, a clearer transmission, you have to put the psychic in a Faraday cage, and on top of that, you should tweak the Faraday cage and build it this way, and use this type of metal, and use this. They were telling him and constructing him how to like build the Faraday cage in a specific way that would like help this transmission, and it did.
Whoa.
Because you can hear the tapes. It was very like stalled speech and waiting. And then when they did the Faraday cage sessions, it was like just boom, they would talk. So I heard that and I was like, okay, well that's weird,
So crazy.
Because like, again, there's a lot of it that you could just say, oh, this could have been made up or whatever. But when it gets to that, it was very, very specific stuff. Copper, they were big on copper. You need to use that, and it needs to be, these dimensions. I mean, really specific stuff, and they would follow it. So they were basically like following instructions from the Nine.
And you see the results get better as far as their channeling.
You see the results get better. And that, again, to me, I just thought that's interesting, because it's not just sort of like, spiritual mumbo jumbo
Hand
stuff.
wavy stuff that's like totally
Yeah.
unfalsifiable.
Yeah.
It's like literally like the transmissions are coming. When you say that it's getting better, it's just like more gets channeled, like more substance.
Yeah, more information, clearer,
Yeah.
just sort of more precise. And the other thing too was, again, it was this thing with copper, where they would also say, okay, what you need to do is you need to get this is really crazy because of what happens later on in his story, but they would say, you need to have copper touching your skin. And so you would need some sort of like bracelet or something that would kind of like constantly be touching your skin in order, again, for like the transmission to be better. And they would do that.
Whoa.
And what's crazy is one of the space kids that I met and that we interviewed for the film, she whipped out this, this was, only a couple years ago. She whipped out this bracelet she had that was like a little copper plate on this bracelet that she said like they all had to wear when they were doing their channeling sessions with him decades later. So the copper thing is strange. And Puharich obsessed over that. And that's the other thing to me, being a little skeptical. I was like, well, someone of Puharich's, academic abilities, like clearly he wouldn't take the time and the energy like to look into this stuff as deep as he did, like he like obsessed over this. He would go meet other academics. Hey, does this check out? And, he really like was obsessive about this being legitimate.
And Phyllis Schlamer, who later wrote The Only Planet of Choice, which channels the Nine, I think she talks about the Nine with respect to messages around the Earth being a bottleneck of consciousness, right? And like other planets being more ascended, and these Nine really trying to help raise consciousness on Earth, which might sort of sound like a cliche, but...
Yeah. One thing that they were doing at the Roundtable was that this psychic, this one particular psychic would claim that at a certain time of night, they would see an orb, and they would go outside by the ocean and they would see orbs. And this happened. And the only, evidence I have is Puharich's own writing, because we have all of his journals, and he writes this in his journals where he literally says like this psychic would just blurt out, 11 o'clock, tonight, and they'd go out and they would see an orb.
Whoa.
And I just thought that was interesting because there's so much talk of this orb stuff going on currently. I don't know a whole lot about it, but that kind of rang a bell where I'm like, oh yeah, he wrote about that. And he did many experiments where he allegedly took photos, which of course, weren't in the big stash of photos we had from back then, but he that's what he claimed, that there was like orb activity. This would have been, early 50s again. Yeah.
So trippy. Yeah, no, that almost sounds like Chris Bledsoe or something. These people who seem to attract these orbs, and it would make sense because those people also seem to be sort of high psi, or have higher kind of mind matter capabilities or whatever. Seems like there's some sort of correlation there. The connection Lavenda makes is that all these people conducting the seance, bringing in these Nine, maybe extraterrestrial beings, maybe beings that go to the 9 Egyptian gods or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't exactly know what these 9 beings are, but it's like a council. And later the 9 plays prominently because this channeler, Phyllis Schlamer, like gets all these messages from the 9 along with a lot of the kids and stuff.
Yeah.
But that all of the people in this original seance with these blue-blooded elites are also entangled with the JFK assassination, which is so crazy.
To make a long story short, there's a seance that's held in late 52, early 53. I think it was the New Year's Eve of 52 to 53. And there are 9 people involved in the seance. Now, these are not just some casual 9 people you pick up like, your neighbors or something, right? This was a DuPont and an Astor and a Forbes. I mean, everybody that represents the blue-blooded Brahmins of American society, old money people, were at a seance, a freaking seance, right? In the woods in Maine on New Year's Eve with Andrea Puharich. And one of them, is the guy who was the inventor of the Bell helicopter. Right. So
Is that Arthur Young?
Arthur Young. So Arthur Young is there with his wife. His wife is Ruth Forbes Payne Young, right? She had a lot of names. She was excessively nomenclatured. And so you have, Ruth Forbes Payne Young. She's a Forbes. She was married to a George Payne, Lyman Payne, and also married to Arthur Young.
So in that seance with the, these kind of blue-blooded elites that Puharich is convening, I think one of the people who's close with Mary Bancroft, who's Dulles' mistress, is a woman named Ruth Forbes Payne.
Yeah, Ruth Forbes Payne.
And so she's a Forbes first.
Yeah.
So again, go into the blue-blooded elite thing. Yeah. But I think her daughter is Ruth Payne, who takes in Lee Harvey Oswald.
I know.
And Lee Harvey Oswald is living with Ruth Payne, and I think gets a job at the Texas Book Depository in Texas, in Dallas, through Ruth Payne, and then ends up, maybe not being the lone gunman, but, attempting JFK's life.
And in her home, she opens her door to some refugees, people who are recent immigrants from Russia. Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife, Marina, and their kids.
Whoa.
So they're living with Ruth Payne in this house in Texas. She gets him the job at the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah. And so it's these weird entanglements where, and the Nine believed themselves to be sort of agents, or sorry, the group in the seance believed themselves to be agents of these extraterrestrials, right? Like to be acting on their behalf. Yeah. And so and I know Puharich would stop at airports and try and meditate because he thought he would be bringing about world peace, and that the Nine would speak to him through his watch and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I wonder sometimes, was it all good or was it bad? I mean, I don't think, the assassination of JFK was good. He seemed like a great man who was resisting really dark forces.
Yeah.
So it's a strange story.
Well, I just want to hear something really strange about that.
Oh, yeah. Legend has it that in 1943, the Navy tried to teleport a ship in what's now known as the Philadelphia experiment. And it kind of worked. It disappeared, reappeared, and then half the crew got atomically fused into the ship's walls. Others just vanished. No one was where they were supposed to be. Talk about a breakdown in communication. And you know who was leading the whole project? My favorite, the mid-century anti-gravity inventor, Thomas Townsend Braun, who literally had a nervous breakdown that year due to the very poor communication among the team members. You know what that sounds like? Your team, before you had Quo. This year, upgrade your system to a workspace that keeps your team from shattering across dimensions. If you've ever tried to schedule a meeting across 5 time zones and 6 platforms, you know the absolute horror of losing people to the ether. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. It's a single streamlined command center for calls, notes, transcripts, chats, even AI summaries. An all-in-one shared reality, yours. No vanishing, no fusing into calendars, just your team, fully entangled and synced across time zones, timelines, even caffeine levels. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/Jesse. That's QUO.com/Jesse. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Now back to the show.
Want to hear something really strange about that?
Oh, yeah.
So
that's why you're here.
This woman who I got to know very well, who's in the film, she was Puharich's assistant for many years, and starting in, I think, 1963. And basically, she worked with him, I think, until like the mid-'80s. And she's amazing. She's from Hawaii. Very nice woman, but she met him in New York. She was a student at NYU, and Puharich is working. This is a whole other thing to get into, but he had started his company there called Intellectron Corporation. But she started as sort of an intern at this company, Intellectron, which was basically a biomedical research company. We can get into that. But basically, she told me a story that she was working at Intellectron the day JFK was assassinated, and that these men in suits, she says, came into the offices, went into Puharich's office, said something to him that seemed very serious, and they left. And she said the whole rest of the day, Puharich was out of sorts.
What?
This could be as simple as, how horrible that the president was shot, or it could have been something else. But she was very specific to say, I remember this happening. It was very strange. But to finish the 9 thing, basically in the roundtable ends in 57, I think, right? Meaning they for whatever reason, I mean, I think I know the reason. Basically, he moved on to Intellectron, which I can talk about, but he claims, that we ran out of funding, the benefactors lost interest, and it shut down. But all the while, he was getting money from the army. I mean, there's records of that. But so the 9 stopped, allegedly. And I think Lavenda, talks about this, but a lot of like the early 9 related conspiracies start around that time too, with this idea that it was a psyop, or that it was this early psychological warfare experiment where can we get, certain groups of people to believe in something, and to what extent. And a lot of people think that was like the 9. They think that's all it was. They think any sort of like real channeling or any is just, is fake, and that it was all set up as this sort of psychological warfare experiment, which, there's reasons to think that that could be true, but that's where a lot of that, starts.
I think that's possible, but you think about like when did MK Ultra start? It was there's probably stuff going on before 52, but really the Korean War is like when, conventionally it's dated to, and the idea that they were that sophisticated at the very start of MK Ultra, where they could convince these sort of elite members of society that they were in touch with these specific extraterrestrial beings, and that those extraterrestrial beings were constructing Faraday chambers that were able to like make the messages they received more effective, like this elaborate sort of magic trick that seems a little beyond the pale to me. But
it's a big mystery. I mean, even I'll admit it, the years and years I research, I mean, even I don't know, like a lot of people I talk to who are interested in this stuff and know about the film and so forth, like they think that I know all the answers, and like I wish I did. And it's not like I'm hiding something because I'm worried that I'm going to be monitored. I just don't. I know what was in the archives, and a lot of the film for me was like, okay, what do we know? What is a fact? And let's like work off that. And so it was really just like, okay, here's the transcripts. Here's what they were saying.
Speaking of what are the facts, we have to get back to this Intellectron thing. Like, so is the implication of this story that this company had something to do with the assassination of JFK? Or like, were these men in tweed suits raiding the office, the CIA? And were they thinking that Intellectron had something to do with this? Or...
So Puharich, he leaves the Roundtable, he moves to New York City, or he moves to Ossining. A lot of people know this in relation to Puharich because he lived there most of his life.
Upstate New York.
Yeah, it's an hour on the train north of the city. Mad Men, of course, the show. Like I didn't even realize all the characters, they all live in Ossining. Like Don, I guess I remember watching it, but there's some reference like they live in Ossining. So it's a very, wealthy area, and all of a sudden Puharich has what's considered like a mansion there, basically a huge house. He moves there, he tells his family that basically he just got this contract to study basically like more of what was going on at the Roundtable Foundation, but there were specific people who needed him to move to New York, so they moved there. I mean, his family life is a whole different thing. He had his wife sadly committed suicide around this time.
Really?
He was very like, distraught about that. And
what happened?
I received a grim call from Jenny's father. Jenny had quietly leapt from the hospital roof into eternity. I wept for Jenny. I wept for my failure to keep her healthy and happy. I wept for our 3 daughters, who would never know a normal upbringing. I cried out to God in crushing despair.
But so they moved to New York. He starts this company called Intellectron. He gets Annie Jacobson helped figure this out. He gets a grant for $300,000, which at the time would have been like at least $1 million or more, from the Atomic Energy Commission, which is strange. And we have all the documents that we found that prove that they went and visited him. They gave him this grant. So he starts this thing, Intellectron, which is basically labeled as a biomedical research company. So they have an office in Hell's Kitchen. And again, with Puharich, I have to stress, like, there was always these instances in his life, this one being the really the first, but it was sort of the Roundtable too, where like all of a sudden he just has this company and these employees and this fund, all of a sudden it's just, kind of expensive to have a big office in New York City and all this state of the art at the time, electronic equipment. And
well, it sounds like in classic intelligence world front sort of stuff.
Well,
like how does Epstein have a huge hedge fund?
Oh yeah, he just always had, and it's always this company.
Yeah.
And basically, this was early '60s, now 62, 63. This is when he starts the hearing experiments, where basically he claims that deaf people would come into the office and they would do research on them, and basically they designed a device which would enable deaf people to hear, basically by emitting a certain frequency that would somehow bypass like the normal way we hear and go directly to the hearing center in the brain. And it was this breakthrough medical discovery, which, go figure, goes completely quiet. No one ever hears about it.
Yeah.
But that's when he first starts this whole, radio frequency stuff, voices in the head kind of stuff, which again was under this, we're researching on deaf people. We're doing this, in a medical sense, we're helping people. But that's when these, men in suits show up. That's when, once again, he's getting contracts from Navy, CIA. Again, almost everyone that was involved at the Roundtable was back in this Intellectron situation with him. And so that, I think the connection, I don't want to just jump to conclusions, but I think what I've often thought with this JFK thing and why to Melanie, his assistant, seemed like such a big deal is that it may have had some tie-in with a mind control, sort of like a Sirhan situation with Lee Harvey Oswald. I know that's like a pretty crazy, bold claim, but that's just what I've thought.
It's not
because they were doing that. We're talking, and again, this is something I don't think a lot of people know. And I think people don't realize a lot of that MK Ultra stuff happened much earlier, but they were doing this work in 62, 63 of like basically sending messages to people's heads, and we have footage. We have, it's real. The people from the Atomic Energy Commission write very clearly in letters we found, like we went, Annie Jacobson talks about it, I think, in her book, like one of the guys was like, I don't believe you, test me, and just, and did the test on himself and it worked. And then it goes dark, and Intellectron closes, and all of a sudden it's on to the next sort of, mysterious company.
Deep Black program or some other front company.
Yeah.
That's really, really trippy. Is there any explicit connection between Lee Harvey Oswald and Intellectron, or that sort of speculation on your part?
I haven't looked, but I just think, if you want to go there, it's like Lavenda says, the whole connection there at the Roundtable, and then this weird incident where they seem to make a big deal about telling him about the assassination. At that exact time, that exact year, they're researching ways to be able to send messages to someone's mind to do something specific, Manchurian Candidate, et cetera, et cetera.
Apparently, Dulles did not want the fact that Ruth Paine had actually been at the summer house or whatever. I think that summer, right before JFK was assassinated.
Yeah.
She did not want, that at all on record. I think Mary Bancroft started to talk about it, and he he kind of acted like he didn't know what was going on when he would have reacted earnestly if he hadn't. He clearly did know what was going on. And obviously, Dulles was probably among a very short list of people. If the intersection of capabilities, motivation to take out JFK, Dulles has to be on anybody's short list.
Yeah.
And then to further kind of steelman there maybe being a there, we know that Jack Ruby was an MK Ultra patient.
Yeah.
I mean, 95%, you have letters between Jolly West and Sidney Gottlieb, who's definitely the kind of architect of MK Ultra, and Jolly West was, UCLA psychiatry, but clearly very involved in Operation Midnight Climax and maybe brainwashed Charles Manson. And he sees Jack Ruby, who never remembers killing Lee Harvey Oswald, in his jail cell alone, no cameras, comes out and says, Jack Ruby has had a psychiatric break. And then Jack Ruby, who was fully lucid but just didn't remember having shot Lee Harvey Oswald, talks about Jews dying outside of his cell and just literally cracks. So very, very strange, possible connections.
Well, the other really strange thing at this time was that Puharich was working with someone named Jose Delgado, who you probably might know who that is.
Delgado, an old friend of mine, a brilliant researcher from Spain, implanted radio receivers in the heads of bulls.
Delgado has remote control of the animal.
Do you realize the fantastic possibilities if from the outside we could modify the inside? Could we give messages to the inside?
He was a guy from Spain. He was a researcher. He was involved with a lot of this sort of mind stuff in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, but I think he's mostly known as somebody who did experiments with putting an implant in the head of a bull and basically being able to remote control a bull and basically say, go this, stop, go left, go right. And he was able to do it. There's literally footage of the experiment happening. And Puharich, we later found out was close friends, as Puharich says himself, with Delgado. We found letters between the two of them during this time. And it was nothing too sinister. It was mostly like, hey, I'm going to go to this conference. Are you going to be there? But they clearly were close. I mean, there's some people I met during the process of this who were like, don't even go there and don't talk about the connection he had with Delgado. But, I was interested to...
No, it's fascinating. You have a guy who's being able to pacify a bull and play the bull like a video game, and that clearly was the heir to MK Ultra, which was mostly sodium pentothal, LSD, that sort of thing. It was chemical based. If in the early 60s we had chips that could control animals, and you had heirs to MK Ultra like MK Often, which were done, I believe, at the Science and Engineering Institute in the Northeast as well.
Yeah.
It's like, well, of course, we're going to be way more advanced on that stuff now. It's creepy to think about. It's one of those things you don't even want to think about it, because the second you do think about it, you get into reality being far weirder than we could ever imagine.
So yeah, if you think, okay, they're putting an implant in the head of a bull, like you say, basically remote controlling the thing, why wouldn't you try to do that to a human being? I mean, why wouldn't you? And I think that was going on at Intellectron. I mean, I'm sure of it, because there's way too many connections. I don't have a document that says, here's the experiment we did, but that whole decade of the 60s was such a odd decade for Puharich. He was so quiet. There's all these records of the Roundtable, tapes, photos, everything. And all of a sudden you get to the 60s, it's like nothing really. Very little documentation, very little, photographic evidence of what he was up to. And all of a sudden in the 70s, boom, picks back up. There's 100 photo. So it's a very mysterious decade, and it just so happened to be when he had this company in Intellectron.
Yeah.
With these very odd connections, Delgado.
I think it's becoming super clear that.
And the other thing too,
yeah,
not to cut you off, is I've with all this stuff in this film, I've gone to like the ends of the earth to try to track down, and nothing, absolutely nothing. This place never existed in Intellectron. You would not find. The only thing I ever found was there's a guy, a pretty interesting guy actually. His name's Beardsley Graham. He was involved in NASA in the 60s, early 70s, colleague of Puharich's, but he was like, I guess, he was somehow involved in Intellectron as like an outside consultant or something. And in his archives at Berkeley, there was like a couple documents that had, Intellectron letterhead, and it was like correspondence. And that was like the only thing I could find. And even in that, it was nothing revealing. It was just like records and sort of like, financial records, which again didn't point to anything.
Yeah.
So there's this place did not exist, but
it's
it very
so
much
crazy.
did.
It very much did. Well, now I feel like it's one of these things that's slowly shifting, and I think more and more people are going to start to recognize the fact that MK Ultra had a role not only in the JFK assassination, but in the RFK assassination. You mentioned Sirhan, who had written in his diary right before he shot RFK, just like over and over, it was like some neuro-linguistic programming was coming through him. To this day, does not remember having shot him. He's like, I must kill him, sort of thing.
Yes.
And you have RFK Jr. now, who's head of the FDA. He himself has gone deep on his father's death. I think he was 14 at the time. And I think he recognizes that he was actually shot from the back and not from the front. So there was this other gunman, again, just like JFK. I think he thinks that, MK Ultra was involved. This guy, William Jennings Bryan, not to be confused with the 1890s William Jennings Bryan, was this kind of mysterious, deep statey figure who I believe was tight with Sirhan. And so I think these things are going to start to come out, that MK Ultra was far more pervasive than we ever realized. And there's even a book called, I don't know if you know about this book, The Controllers by Martin Cannon.
Yeah. He mentions Puharich in that.
So this book is insane. What's the thesis of this book? As you know, a lot of the guests I sit down with, whether they're physicists, intelligence officers, people who've worked inside black programs, are operating at a really impressive level mentally. Sometimes I feel like I'm a chimp talking to human beings. Often their work takes a toll, and a lot of them track their health obsessively. Regular lab work, obscure biomarkers, often things that most people never look at. Meanwhile, last time I went to a primary care doctor, they ran maybe like 8 biomarkers, and they told me I was fine and sent me home. This massive difference between the ordinary, broken, and limited healthcare system and what elite people are doing to track their health got me interested in Superpower. The beautiful thing is they make elite-level healthcare accessible. They'll literally send a licensed professional to your home, or you visit a nearby lab. One simple lab test and you get over 100 biomarkers. Heart, liver, thyroid, hormones, metabolism, vitamin levels, even environmental toxins. After that, their app builds you a full action plan. Supplement suggestions you can buy directly through them. Nutritional guidance. Lifestyle adjustments. They even give you your true biological age, and you can track that over time. And it's not just a one-time snapshot. Each test builds on the last, so you're actually seeing progress instead of starting from zero every year. Make this the year you stop guessing about your health and you start getting serious with Superpower. Not only did Superpower reduce their price to just $199, but for a limited time, our listeners get an additional $20 off with code ALCHEMY. Head to superpower.com and use code ALCHEMY at checkout for $20 off your membership. After you sign up, they'll ask you how you heard about them, so please make sure to mention American Alchemy to support the show. What's the thesis of this book?
It's basically about this idea of the fabrication of alien abductions, right? That's at least a big part of it.
Some of them being chip implantations done basically for MK Ultra purposes. And people being tricked into saying, "Oh, you like this is your guardian angel" or whatever. And
well, there's a whole thing. We can get to that later. But the whole Intellectron thing, basically, to cap that off, it was one of many of these very, to me, it became very obvious fronts. I mean, there's just no question about it, that he had, and they were doing all that type of experimentation. Again, there's footage of them doing an experiment on a woman. There's no sound, but it's obvious what's happening. You can see, she's in the other room. She's behind a wall. They're in the other room. He has his device that he invented in the early 60s called the TD100, which I've told you about. And this basically enables like a certain frequency to be sent to somebody. And, it's kind of like a situation where if you're exposed to this frequency, it's at a certain wavelength that only you can hear and anyone else around you can't hear. And this kind of ties into what he was doing later in the 70s, but they're doing an experiment on a woman using this, and it's very clear what's happening, and it's very clear it's working. This was like Neuralink, basically.
And you could send or implant thoughts to a person.
Yeah.
And that's crazy. And so how exactly did it work? You played a tone and then you would...
Well, there's two things. One of the things he invented back then too, which again was Puharich says himself was classified, and you've probably heard of this, is the tooth implant.
A device could be inserted into one of your back molars that acted as a transducer that could send signals across the facial nerves into the hearing centers of the brain.
It took about a month of daily therapy, and they would have their hearing improve significantly.
It was extraordinary because it was a totally new way of understanding how we hear. You could send signals to someone secretly. It had a lot of potential.
We gave a demonstration at the Pentagon. We fitted this device to this general, and we had somebody out in the hall broadcasting, and he said, "God damn it, I hear it. God damn it, I hear it. The bastard did it."
It was basically a radio receiver that would be, I guess at one point it was, Puharich kind of says it as though you could slip on some sort of thing, like anyone could just kind of like slip this thing on their tooth. But in other instances, it was very specific about it being like a real like what do you call it? A molar or like something that would really be put on your tooth. And that would basically be able to receive a radio signal. It would pick it up here and it would send it through the nerves of the face that would basically connect to whatever area in your brain you register, sounds. And so you could be, again, you could clearly see them doing this. And this was a short distance, like I said, a woman right across the room. And you can clearly see they're able to do it. So you can imagine if the research continued, at what length can this go? Can this be in another town? Could it be in another state? Could it be in another country? So that's what they were experimenting with. But so the first part of it was the tooth, where you could send the message to the tooth implant, hear it in the head. And the second part was an offshoot of that, where basically, from what I understand, you sort of just bypass the whole tooth thing. And it's a very specific radio frequency that I guess you can't tune into like on a normal frequency band or a radio. I mean,
do you know what frequency?
No, he doesn't talk about it.
Yeah. That would seem to be extremely classified, would be my guess.
It has a lot to do with sine waves.
Yeah.
I must say again, like this is not my forte. Like
sure.
A lot of this I stumbled into. But it was this idea that, again, you would bypass the tooth and the frequency would essentially just be sent directly to the head and be picked up in that same area that the tooth was essentially connecting to.
Yeah, just to also substantiate what you're saying to the audience who might think we're crazy. I mean, as early as Beethoven, he was deaf, and he used something called bone conduction, where he would bite onto a conductive rod while he was playing piano. That would bypass his ear canal, and the vibrations would literally play in his brain, and so he would like de facto be able to hear his own playing without actually kind of, hearing it through his ear canal. So that is a thing. There's a story there's a kind of apocryphal, but I think substantiated story around Lucille Ball, who had just...
I've heard about this.
It's in the telepathy tapes.
And
she had gotten a tooth filling or whatever, and she's driving, and she starts to hear the radio in her head because she still has some metal in her teeth. I think there's a story with Puharich, where some guy works at a metal mill or something.
Yeah, that was his first aha moment, is that they got a mental patient, a guy who claimed he was hearing voices, but his family's convinced he's sane. And we're worried because they want to put him in a mental hospital, and we don't want that to happen. So, can you check him out? So they bring him in, they get to know him, and he says, okay, I work at this metal factory where I guess it basically is like grinding metal pieces and this kind of thing. Annie Jacobson talks about it too in her book.
Puharich's theory was that this metal dust had somehow collected on his teeth, and in essence acted like a radio antenna.
We found out he was tuned to station WOR in New York.
And they put the mental patient in their Faraday cage, which blocks out all electronic signals. And the mental patient suddenly is no longer hearing voices, is like perfectly sane.
And sure enough, as soon as we locked the door, the sound ceased. Open the door, the sound would come on.
That's pretty remarkable of Puharich to think that all through and to test it in the laboratory.
And that kicked off like all of this research where it said, okay, well, if that's possible, like what else is possible with that basic idea that that's, real?
Yeah, and if you can bypass the ear canal with vibration, whatever is processing the audio ultimately in the brain, we know that you can turn molecular mass into frequency. Everything has a quote unquote resonant frequency.
Yeah.
This sounds woo-woo, but what I just said is fact.
Yeah.
Could you then use some sort of electromagnetic, radio wave or some wave that connects directly to the brain? And that kind of gets into freaky territory because you end up in sort of psychic warfare, that's ubiquitous or whatever and widespread. Like it's kind of weird to think about. But I mean, if you're saying that was possible back then, it's just wild. And then you mentioned sine waves. I just interviewed a guy named Dan Sherman.
Yeah.
And you texted me when you saw the interview because you said you felt like it kind of comported with a lot of the stuff you had been studying around Puharich. If Puharich is doing this stuff in the 60s, then it kind of makes me believe the Sherman stuff a whole lot more, which was happening in the early 90s around messages he's downloading. But maybe it does beget the question, is the Sherman stuff genuinely, extraterrestrial, or were people beaming messages that were extraterrestrial to test the veracity of the messaging or whatever through him? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think he was lying, and I think the program is real.
The genesis of it was in 1947. We came in contact with an alien species, and in 1960, they started a project. It was called Project Preserve Destiny, and it was designed to genetically manage fetuses, human fetuses, so that they would have the heightened ability to do this particular thing that I was going to school for. And he said, I'm going to play a tone, and I want you to mentally hum that tone. And he said that you will eventually feel a connection. The line will change. When I saw the sine wave move, I went, oh, okay, well, there's a mental disconnect there that's not supposed to be happening. That this is not possible.
Yeah.
Do you think that it was kind of a development from, what you were looking into with Puharich?
I'd have to imagine it was. And that's always the question,
You said there are a lot of sine waves. He literally says, I had to flatten a sine wave.
When I saw the sine wave move, it is like it came into focus, this thing that I was doing in my head.
That's why I reached out, because again, like for me, a lot of this was, okay, I have all this information. I'm not a physicist. I'm not most of this stuff, but I'd have to imagine it's connected, because Puharich, the way this machine worked as well, had something to do with specific sine waves, very, very specific. He was always talking about sine waves. And so I can't imagine that wasn't some sort of early interpretation of what he was talking about.
And you have this machine that you like, where you're matching tones and stuff. I mean, that sounds exactly like Sherman.
It's all tones. And then the thing with the machine is, again, and like you said, sounding crazy, like for a long time making this film, like I had to really grapple with like that a lot, because I knew what I was hearing and sort of not so much researching, because a lot of stuff we got were like tapes of these experiments. So it's not just like I'm reading a report, you're hearing it. So I'm hearing, these channeling sessions. I'm hearing these experiments he's doing in Intellectron, and, you can just tell something's going on, something strange. And so you're right. I mean, I think like if that was happening in 60, 61, 62, I mean, I don't know. And this transitions into the Uri Geller stuff, which I believe is very much involved in that same sort of research. But
how so?
Yeah. Well, I think it's my belief that Geller was sort of like a mind control guinea pig in a way. There's a lot of context that would prove that was what his sort of role was in this whole
explain that
story.
That's fascinating.
Well, he so basically Puharich in the 60s, so we had Intellectron, and the thing is too, with this device he invented, the TD100 it was called, which is called Transdermal 100. But again, this was supposed to be this breakthrough, medical device where people who are deaf can hear, think about what we could do with this. But it just goes like, again, he never talks about it. No one in his family, oh yeah, I wonder whatever happened to that. Like you would think that with such an amazing discovery, like something would have come of it, or it was just like went dark, basically, probably around 68. He never talks about it. Again, only way later in his life, he never ever talks about it. Of course, we learned he was using it with the space kids years later, that nobody knew about that. But so he's coming off the tail end of all the Intellectron stuff, right? Right when he meets Geller, like literally it was 1970 is when he first hears about Geller, goes to Israel. Intellectron is still happening then. I mean, from what I understand, like it was still very much, an operating company. So he's going to Israel to meet Uri Geller while he's still very much involved in the research of essentially sending messages to people. And he gets to Israel, he discovers Uri Geller. I mean, I think a lot of people know this story, but Geller was allegedly this very amazing psychic guy who could bend spoons with his mind and read people's minds and do all sorts of things like that. He could like hover his hand over a watch and it would the hands would move and all these kinds of things. And so,
do you believe he could actually do those things, or do you think that was stage magic? Or
all I can say about that is he did bend a spoon for us when we did the interview, and I don't know how he did it.
Whoa.
So that's all I can say. It could have been a trick.
And
but I can't to this day figure out how he did it.
The easy debunks on things like that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so all I can say is like, yeah, it could have been a trick.
Yeah.
But it was definitely kind of strange and cool, and he did do it. But so Puharich, again, the story goes, Puharich was kind of smitten with Geller, and oh my God, this guy's, an amazing psychic. I'm interested in psychic phenomena. I want to study him. So he brings him back. But what people don't really know, unless they read Puharich's book on Uri Geller, which is kind of like a rare book to come across, but he has this whole episode in Israel before he even brings him back to the United States, where he basically hypnotizes Geller and, the nine come through.
Really?
And all of a sudden, after however many years, 53 from when Dr. Vanad did it to 71. And guess what happens? He starts channeling the nine, Uri Geller. And so Puharich is, apparently shocked and, I can't believe this is happening. There's all these tape recordings we have of this going down. And that kind of kickstarts again, the whole nine thing comes back into the picture through Uri Geller. And all of a sudden they're like back, and he's channeling them, and he's communicating with them. But it's very strange because Puharich, as I just said, was still very much involved in the Intellectron company, which, as we know, was experimenting with being able to send voices, send thoughts to people. And so one could assume that Uri Geller was a, experiment in that way when the nine just so happened to reappear all those years later. And it's also strange because I think a lot of people know, like, Geller has claimed his involvement with Mossad and his Israeli intelligence and all these things. There's reasons to believe Puharich may have been a double agent for Israel. In fact, he says it
really
on tape, but he kind of says it in a jokey way. And so it always just stuck to me, like, okay, is this a joke?
Have you found any connections between him and Israel?
Yeah.
What were the connections? Besides Uri Geller, obviously.
Well, so we did tons of like FOIA requests trying to find stuff on him, and like basically got nothing. But the only thing we were able to get was this big chunk of FBI documents, which is basically monitoring all of his movements in Israel, literally page after page.
Mm-hmm.
He just got here, he's leaving, he picked this bag up, he did, in the exact years he's going there to see Geller. So there's that.
Mm-hmm.
And then multiple people who knew him, who never really said anything until much later in their lives, told me that he was Mossad. Again, I don't have a document or something that proves this. And then Puharich also mentions in a letter he was writing to, there's a good friend of his, this woman who kind of helped him with bookkeeping and stuff, and she was like his closest confidant, and he would write these letters to her all the time. It's very clear that they were close. He spoke with her very differently than other people, but he basically admitted to being part of a Israeli U.S. mind control program that was happening at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, which is an army base. And I read that, and again, what do you make of it? It's either true or for some reason he's making it up. I don't know why.
It's fascinating.
So he wrote that, and then in this tape, he kind of jokingly says, "Oh, I'm a double agent for the Israelis," and he also was always there. That's the other thing. Like, yes, he went to investigate Geller, but he was, even through the 80s, like well after him and Geller kind of parted ways, he's always going there. On a lot of the channeling tapes that are happening in the 70s with the space kids, he's referring by name to Israeli generals. This one guy, Aharon Yariv, who was, I think, the head of Army intelligence. You can look him up. I mean, he was constantly, should we give this information to Yariv, always referring to him and other people high up there. So a lot of red flags, nothing, again, no concrete, document or something, but it's strange. And I don't know. I mean, again, that's something, like, after all this time, I'm still thinking, okay, what was really going on there?
Fascinating, man. What do you think when he goes to Israel initially to see Geller in 1971, and Geller's kind of channeling the nine again? Is it like the nine are somehow, like, he has a protocol to, like, summon these specific 9 extraterrestrial beings? Is it this cynical hypnotic technique that he's doing where he's implanting this idea of 9 extraterrestrial beings, or what do you think that is? Is he calling in something that exists in reality, these 9, entities, or is he creating those entities synthetically?
First of all, just to quickly mention, like, this idea that Puharich is very, there's always 2 stories, right? So when he went to Israel for the first time in some lecture, he said, there was this parapsychology foundation and they wanted me to go. So they scraped some money together and I was able to get a plane ticket and I went to Tel Aviv and that's how I got there. Right. And then Geller himself said, oh yeah, no, he was sent by the CIA, like directly. He was consulting for CIA. That's why he came. And then someone else, close to Puharich said, oh yeah, like that, he was CIA, that's why he went. But in this lecture, in fact, twice in 2 separate lectures, Puharich, when he kind of tells the story to an audience, and he says, oh yeah, they just, bought me a ticket, this foundation. So, again, a little thought in my mind where I'm like, okay, who's telling the truth,
Yeah.
I think it's obvious, but
Right.
But with the 9, I mean, so yeah, it all did come from hypnosis. That was the protocol. It was a very, your typical countdown from a certain number. Once you get there, you're in a state where they can come through. And I do think, again, like I mentioned earlier, kind of having to accept some of these darker parts of the story. Like, I do think, to some extent, like he was implanting this idea because you can hear it. I mean, again, this isn't like speculation. Like on the tapes, you can very much hear him saying, is it the not, the type of like leading questions, I think, that a lot of people say, oh, you can't trust a hypnosis if they're doing this. And it was that. It was very leading questions. And are you sure it's not the 9? And, oh, actually, yeah, you're right, it is. And that kind of thing. But what's so confusing is there's a lot of other sessions he did where it was like, not like that at all, the complete opposite, not leading at all.
And the 9 would still come through.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. And that always goes back to the crux of Puharich of like, okay, what was he? Yes, he believed in this stuff, but yes, he was also involved in very, by his own admittance, involved in MK Ultra and all these things. So it's like, what?
Believer, master manipulator. I mean, I usually, clearly he was manipulative somewhat.
Yeah.
I usually get to the end of these questions thinking it's like a yes and, like an improv or whatever. It's usually not like one neat solution kind of explains everything away.
Yeah.
One neat solution that would explain everything away would be, you could think of the Archimedes lever of reality itself and its mind control, right? Like that would explain like aliens, reverse engineer, like so many things. But then you get into like the facts, and the facts are just weirder than you think often. And it's like, well, I actually think there might be these other beings that come in, and in certain cases he's not asking leading questions. And, but it's fascinating. He isolates specific extra low frequency waves that he thinks are particularly powerful as far as implanting thoughts. Is that right?
Yeah, there's and again, this was interesting because his research into, ELF, extremely low frequency, that was much later, like late 70s, 80s. He was very involved in that. But I figured out, like, once again, like this origin point of the Roundtable Foundation, like he was researching this stuff back then, like this very specific, extremely low frequency that he figured out, like, penetrate the walls of a Faraday cage. That was like the only frequency that could do that. They went on to use that frequency with like submarine experiments. So that he believed was like the frequency that could carry, audio information to somebody's head.
And he was very concerned that the Soviets had similar capabilities.
Yeah. I mean, there's, Project Pandora, which started in, I think, the 60s, which, going back to Intellectron, that was right around the time this was happening, which was, the same thing. The Russians had these sort of radio frequency weapons, which they did. I mean, that's all proven at that time. I mean, this is like pre-Havana syndrome stuff. And so coincidentally, at Intellectron, they're doing a lot of that same stuff. I do firmly believe that Geller was some sort of guinea pig for these experiments, because it's just too many weird red flags around this time that he meets him. And I think, and again, I could be totally wrong, but I think that there was just this, we need to experiment on a real, human being with some of this stuff. And again, it goes back to this MK Ultra, the, LSD, giving LSD to unwitting people. Like at a certain point with these kinds of experiments, you need to, do it on a real person, or else you're never going to know how someone in, the real world will react. And I think Geller, was part of something like this, because there's a lot of experiments they did where there's a story, for instance, where Geller allegedly teleported. So he was walking down the street in New York City, 1973, I think. He claims he's walking down the street in New York City, gets a weird feeling, right? All of a sudden he wakes up and he's in Ossining, New York, which is, however 50 miles or whatever. And he crashes through the screen porch. There's footage, Super 8 movie footage of Puharich filming the screen porch after this allegedly happened. It's all smashed through, right? And Geller allegedly winds up in Ossining. He teleported and from New York City, and Puharich claims or told Geller, oh yeah, this happened, and the Nine did this. Basically, since you were questioning their ability and their power, they said, well, we're going to do something that will make you, never question us again. Oh. And they did this teleportation, right? And the weird thing is, again, like the length Puharich went to actually get again, people don't remember, this was like 70s, like get a load of film, put it in the camera, film, get the film transferred, and be like, hey, look, I actually filmed right after you flew into the window, and here it is, it's proof. So he's doing that. But I that was just one instance of me thinking like, oh, okay, like this is a way to get somebody to believe that some crazy event like that really happened. And Geller believed it. I mean, he talks about it, he wrote about it, and I think later in his life he started to question everything. And he even came out with a statement on a radio show in like 2019 saying that Puharich had experimented on him with mushrooms. Wow. And had experimented extensively with him with hypnosis. But again, like that story is crazy. And I think it's like, okay, like if you can get somebody to believe that they had been teleported and what else could you get someone to believe? And I just think it was all part of that type of experimentation. And Puharich himself, way later in his life, like I said, when he starts to kind of reveal things, he says himself, I was involved in a program and my boss was the guy who did all research with hypnosis and mind manipulation. So, he was doing it. And I think a lot of the Geller stuff was just like, okay, we need a guinea pig here to see if some of these wild ideas work,
So wild. I think there's a story too that Geller tells around him meeting Wernher von Braun, and Wernher von Braun taking him to a safe that contained some UFO artifacts, maybe from Roswell.
Yeah, well, Wernher von Braun, again, was somebody close to Puharich in the 60s specifically.
Really?
Yeah, his assistant, the same one I told you about who made the JFK comment, said, yeah, he talked to him, all the time.
What?
So that was yet another person who was just kind of part of his, Rolodex. But yeah, I think Geller said something to the effect of, he showed him some photographs of something from Roswell or revealed facts to him.
And I think he showed him material, and I think he felt like he had a telepathic connection with the material.
Wernher von Braun takes me into his personal office. There's a safe in the office. He opens the safe. I see a piece of metal. I've never seen such a color. Pulls it out. It's not heavy. Says, Uri, touch this. tell me what you feel now. I put my hand on it and I say, Werner, this is not from here. He says, you're right. This is a piece of a UFO that crashed on our planet.
So it's like he knew that it was not from here or something. Like he showed it to him and he goes, it's not from here. And he goes, how did you know? Some of the, it's so interesting.
The other thing too, and this goes back to the controller's book, a lot of the stories, and again, keep in mind, this is all pre-coming to the U.S., going to SRI. Everyone knows that stuff. This is in Tel Aviv before any of that. And another story like this teleportation one, they're in the Sinai desert. They're driving around in a Jeep, and they see a UFO. And Geller, all of a sudden, I mean, Puharich's book on Geller is fun to read, in and of itself, just because it's just like a cool, crazy sci-fi book, if anything.
Yeah.
Even though it's supposed to be, nonfiction. But he claims that this UFO lands, Geller goes into like a trance, boards the UFO, comes back with like a pen and said, or something like a pen, and basically said, these beings told me to keep this because this will forever be proof that I went on this craft. But the same thing, it's always like, oh, he's in a trance before this happens, apparently. And then it's that same idea of like, he believed it, and Puharich kind of substantiated, oh yeah, we saw it land and we saw you walk on it. And
what?
But then it always goes to that question, like, why? Again, you could just say, oh, well, they wanted to experiment with, can you get someone to believe in? We're just kind of framing it around this ET UFO thing. But it's always like, why do this? Why was he doing this?
Yeah.
I don't, because again, there's no concrete proof. Oh, Geller was a guinea pig. He was a subject. Like, I'm just kind of putting the pieces together, but it just seems to me that it's like, let's take this UFO ET framework and do these kind of mind manipulation experiments around that.
Yeah.
And see what people can believe. And
you also get into weird territory where it's like, it does, again, the MK Ultra thing just explain everything, which is like such a dark version of the truth, but it's possible. We have to entertain that.
Yeah.
Or does MK Ultra actually converging on a technique that the, extraterrestrials or NHI, non-human intelligence, already has mastery over vis-a-vis its ability to like manipulate human beings? Like, I think of one of the most credible cases for me is a guy named Mario Woods, who is at Ellsworth Air Force Base in 1977 in South Dakota. And he was a missile security officer. And he's just like a really upright, great guy. And he thought, like this sort of like B-2 bomber was like kind of winking at him in the distance. He and his, teammate or whatever, his colleague, Michael Johnson, go in this little Jeep and they follow it. They get there and it's this like huge like plasma orb that's glowing. It's red hot. And it's the size of a Walmart is the line he always says. It's sort of this crazy iconic line, and he ends up being transported 9 miles away from the base, like behind a dam. And it's like it's the next morning. He has no idea what happened. And all he, I think, had remembered was beings walking toward him saying, do not fear, do not fear. And then he gets a hypnotic regression and he realizes that, possibly he boarded a craft. And what's really interesting is he says that after, when he gets sort of, debriefed, they check his teeth. I think he said that like the guy checking him now said that there was some sort of ambient radiation in his mouth or something from that time. Really sort of crazy.
That is... The tooth thing is really strange, and there's a lot online about, there's a story about an individual who changed his name, in fact, because he didn't want to be associated with this, but this was, so post Geller, right? So Geller, basically they kind of split up. Geller wants to move on. And again, way later in this 2019 interview, he kind of opens up and said like, yeah, I was kind of like afraid and he really opens up, like, I didn't know what was kind of going on, and I was suspicious, and I just wanted to get away basically from this guy. And so he, but he was famous at that time anyways. So he leaves. Puharich is, trying to find another subject to bring through the nine, he claims. So this is even pre-Phyllis Schlemmer, is right around, because Phyllis Schlemmer was sort of the next channel that he discovers that brings through the nine. But before Phyllis, there was this guy in Florida where Phyllis was from. She knew this guy. He was part of a psychic class that she taught. And again, I've heard from a lot of people that this woman Phyllis was like a legit psychic, knowing things about people and so forth. But there's this guy that she knew. She introduces him to Puharich. They do a bunch of experiments. Yeah, sure enough, he hypnotizes him, and he is communicating with not the nine, but it was some other being. Can't remember the name. But anyways, this guy says, I got really, really weird vibes, etc. But lo and behold, he wakes up one day and realizes he has a metal filling that he never had. And he goes to the dentist and says, what's going on here? I didn't get this done. And they looked and said, yeah, this was done, professionally. There's no question about it. And, complete side note, the guy that Puharich ran Intellectron with was a dentist.
What?
That he met in the army. So this guy discovers a filling he never had. He completely freaks out and leaves the group that is Puharich, Phyllis. And it's sad. And again, this always comes back to this, like, not avoiding the negative stuff. Like, apparently the guy went like, crazy. He just had like a mental breakdown. There's a couple other people in the sphere of this story that this happened to, but that's like a real story. And the guy, and he brought it up to Puharich, and they said, oh, we don't know what you're talking about. We weren't involved with this. Or I think, actually, I think what they said was, oh, this was done by the beings they wanted this to happen, and they did this somehow. And so it's very bizarre, but that goes back to what you just told me is crazy, because this was early 70s. So there might be something going on with this tooth thing. And, again, I think the film does a good job of this, or I hope it does, is I don't believe, and especially don't want to believe, that MK Ultra is responsible for everything and all of this stuff. Because there's a couple stories in Puharich's life that, do seem like legitimate, sort of extraordinary encounters. For instance, in the late 80s, Puharich lived in North Carolina, and there was a story that a bunch of his family was visiting, a bunch of his cousins, and people who, were very skeptical about all of this stuff, skeptical of Puharich's whole world. But some psychic that night or that day said, later tonight, I just got a message that like a UFO is going to show itself over the house. And so we have the video. Puharich's son, Andy, who's an awesome guy, he did this kind of like funny video where he interviewed like all the people who were there at this family gathering and said, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to show up? And everyone said, oh, yes or no. But that night, multiple people saw this huge UFO. And Andy tells the story, and he gets emotional telling it. And he's again a totally sane guy. Of course his dad was Andrei Puharich, but like he's very normal sane guy. And he said, yeah, of course, the camera wasn't out because it was much later in the night. And again, pre-iPhone, of course, you got to run in and grab this bulky VHS camcorder. But apparently, like the Puharich's son and 2 or 3 of the cousins all saw this huge thing, is silently hovered over.
So wild.
And his son, again, very emotionally says, like, that was the moment I said, okay, like I believe in this stuff. And I believe in things my dad did. And he just had a very emotional reaction to that moment. So it's stories like that where I go, okay, well, you know, Puharich isn't running some MK Ultra experiment on his family, you know, decades after all this stuff. So yeah, I don't want to put this idea out there that, you know, I think that way. I mean, again, it's just there's too many red flags in his story that point to his involvement. But then there's that story where even his cousin, who didn't want to be interviewed or whatever, but I did talk to him, and he was like, "Yeah, that happened," you know.
Well, I think there's something. It's like everybody sees the world through a perceptual prism or container, and I'm sure with his hypnotic techniques and with MK Ultra and with implants and all these things, you can break that container and then probably intentionally shade or manipulate what people experience.
Yeah.
But the idea that there's nothing outside of that perceptual prism that involves other entities between man and God, or, you know, whatever your metaphysical beliefs are, I think also involves some sort of hubris. Like, you know, you can have both. But this is, I mean, this is one of the craziest interviews I've ever done, man. This is crazy. I mean, I feel like shocked, like listening to all of these facts. And I'm just thinking, as you're talking about Puharich's son and this UFO showing up, what was because I think of 1952 as the, you know, DC flyover Washington invasion, like maybe the most intense UFO showing in United States history as far as mass media covering it, people seeing things. You know, I actually recently met a witness from 1952, and he was pretty amazing, and he remembers it and stuff. He's one of the probably last living witnesses.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, but do you think that had anything to do with the seance? Because I think of the seance with, you know, the original channeling of the Nine.
It was 52.
Do you know what month?
It was New Year's Eve.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was before then, because again, I don't want to engage in any sort of, you know, selection bias here, but the July 1952 was when the thing showed up. And so,
but a lot of that early channeling with Vinod, that was all 52.
Interesting.
Yeah, into 53. I mean, it could have been, and I told you, like he wrote in his journals about these orbs, and one of the psychics would say, you know, go outside tonight and you're going to see an orb. So, you know.
Well, every time I want to get away from like the occult having to do with UFOs, it's like, it's just so obviously does have everything to do. And there's even a group called the Borderland Society, which was
Borderland. Well, which one?
The Borderlands Research
Society? Yeah. Puharich was very involved in that. In fact, a lot of the recordings we have, not a lot, but some of them came from them. They had a bunch of stuff saved, actually.
So there's a really amazing, like, kind of nuts and bolts UFO researcher who I think did some software stuff for SpaceX. His name is Richard Geldreich, and he has uncovered like a couple of UFO either crashes or appearances where the Borderland Society knew about these UFO appearances before the military did, before the Army, before the Air Force. So, and then you have, you know, this 1933 Magenta crash, which it seems like is getting increasingly corroborated. David Grush, Harold Malmgren both talk about it. And Hugh Angleton and James Jesus Angleton were there, and, you know, maybe there's some occult stuff going on there with the Knights of Malta, right? You know, who knows?
But you know, Puharich was a master Mason.
He was.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And he tells a story in a lecture much later in his life about how he was always approached by these, you know, what he would call kind of dark occult groups and societies, and people trying to like get him to join, and he didn't want anything to do with it and that kind of thing.
Well, Werner von Braun was also, I believe, a Freemason, and he had gone through all these weird neo-pagan rituals as part of the German space program. He was also close with Walt Disney, and I think they made a little movie together, and there's some Freemasonic symbolism there. There's Launchpad 33 in real life that he sort of created. And then my buddy Danny Jones just did an interview with one of the last living Apollo astronauts, Charlie Duke, and the #1 moon landing hoaxer person, Bart Sibrel. And Danny on the phone with me is like, dude, I'm not sure that the early astronauts weren't MK Ultra. And it's weird, you know, and it's like you have, you know, a picture of Jolly West on the set of 2001 Space Odyssey. You have, you know.
There is?
Yeah.
I think I did hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
that's insane.
It is insane. It is insane. And then you have these, it's like Neil Armstrong looking like, he's in a hostage video. Joe Rogan describes it like that, after he comes back from the moon. And so
that is strange.
You have to wonder if there's some sort of like weird, and if I didn't know Puharich knew Werner von Braun. You have one of the MK Ultra architects in touch with the head of the American space program. It's weird.
Well, the other thing too with the NASA connection with Puharich is, again, in the 60s, he was doing like a ton of like contract work for all sorts of different agencies. But so this is actually in newspaper articles we found, but they were doing like telepathy experiments with astronauts. And Puharich claims this. I've never heard it. We don't have the tape, but he claims that they, before they went to the moon, right, they didn't know the surface of the moon, what it would be like, really. So they were saying, okay, how can we land a craft? We don't, could it be hot? Is it cold? Is it spike, whatever. So he claims that they sent remote viewers to the moon to get a picture of like what it would be like, so they would feel comfortable with like sending whatever, if they went to send stuff there. And he says, somewhere in the NASA archives, I'm sure there's the tapes we did where we recorded this psychic kind of remote viewing the moon. And he had the contracts from NASA. Like we have one that doesn't say that, but he clearly, worked with them. We have documentation of that.
Didn't NASA also have a camp around with space children or whatever, psychic space children?
I've heard a lot about that, but I don't know much about that. I mean, I know about obviously Puharich. We can get into that, but I've heard a lot about that they're in the late 60s. There's somewhere in Florida. There was like a NASA thing with kids, but I honestly, I don't know.
I think Gordon Cooper might talk about that.
Oh, dude, Gordon Cooper was very involved with Puharich.
So this is one of the, this is the guy who spent longer in the Earth's orbit, in space than anyone prior to him. He went in the late 50s. And
he went to Ossining like many times. And in his book, he writes about going there, seeing experiments with the Faraday cage, seeing the space kids.
Why was he so interested? I mean, why was a NASA astronaut interested in psychic research?
I don't know. I mean, well, I think Gordon Cooper, I mean, didn't he have some UFO stories or experiences, or at least he was open to talking about that stuff?
We had some kind of craft flying overhead at pretty good altitude and flying the same kind of formation we fly in our fighters.
Were they planes? I mean, what?
Well, it turns out they didn't have wings. They were saucer-shaped. And we never could get as high or as fast as they were, so to really positively identify them, but they were metallic looking and saucer in shape.
So he was definitely like interested in this stuff. So he went up there. Everyone went up there. I mean, the whole Gene Roddenberry thing is crazy.
So the creator of Star Trek.
So that's like something I read about, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. But in Puharich's archive, sure enough, is the tape that no one's ever heard of this session. That is kind of like crazy to be in possession of. But basically, they would do these kind of roundtable-esque channelings where, like back then, these prominent people at the time, were now in mid-70s, would come there, spend time there, and they would do these sessions. And Gene Roddenberry went up a lot. And he makes mention on this one tape recording that, like, he says, like I've said many times in the past, which would indicate that this wasn't the first time he was a part of like a channeling session with them. But we have the tape where it was Roddenberry, Puharich, and Phyllis Schlemmer was the channeler. And, he does his thing. He hypnotically regresses her. She goes into a trance. She starts channeling the Nine, and Roddenberry is there. And it's like an hour or 2 hours of him asking questions about
And that becomes
everything.
the plot of Star Trek? Or?
Well, I wouldn't say the plot because Star Trek had started. I think people think of Deep Space Nine, which that came out post these sessions. And that, of course, Nine. And then there's a character in Deep Space Nine who's called Vinod, just like the early Nine channeler. So there's no question like that's connected. And they actually wrote, I have it, and I don't know what will ever come of it. It's a long story, but Gene Roddenberry wrote a script called The Nine, and it's all about he changed the names and locations, and the whole premise is his experience of working with Puharich and Phyllis channeling the Nine. And we have an original copy of it, and it's like amazing. And from what we understand, like Roddenberry at the time was going through a lot with like, I guess he was like drinking a lot, and I don't know all the specifics, but it just like it, as stuff in the movie industry does, it fell apart or whatever, and it never happened. But he was moved enough to write a whole 130-page script about his experience, and it's called The Nine.
So trippy.
So, yeah.
And you have...
So we should make it, maybe. I mean,
yeah, there you go. Yeah. You have hit Greg up if you're interested.
Yeah.
I mean, you also, think about the Star Trek, you think about the Galactic Federation.
Yeah.
That's mentioned in a couple of real world contexts too, one of which being you have Haim Eshed, who, has won multiple, the highest, national security awards in Israel, is basically the founder of their space program and their equivalent of Space Force, and was, I think, head of it for decades.
Yeah.
And he just writes this autobiography where he talks about the Galactic Federation.
Yeah.
And so do you think there's something like more real going on that in that like the heads of various nation state space programs are aware of here?
Perhaps. Yeah.
Does he mention anything about the Nine too, or
who?
Eshed?
No,
I thought maybe he. Okay, he did.
Not specifically.
Okay.
But the other weird connection to Israel, Puharich, and everything was he was close with Itzhak Bentov.
Oh yeah,
who's a really interesting guy. There's some videos on YouTube of him. He's kind of like the Israeli Puharich. He kind of looks like him, and they have the same vibe going on. But they were good friends. I don't know the specifics of how they met. Apparently, Bentov was instrumental in hooking up Puharich with Geller. I don't know the truth to that, but well, they definitely knew each other because there's photographs of Geller, Puharich, and Bentov in an apartment in Tel Aviv together. But, Bentov is interesting because he worked for Israeli intelligence. I mean, that's a fact. And Puharich was, again, like I said, going to Israel a lot at that time. And he was always tape recording their conversations. Like him and Bentov would sit around like you and I are right now, and they would record all their conversations, which, is not weird necessarily, but also, why would you do that and then save the cassette tapes decades later? So, there's a lot of clues like that goes back to that Israeli connection. And Bentov was one of a number of scientists who were being tracked at, Puharich's house burned in 1978. To this day, no one really knows who did it, but it was a proven, arson job by the fire department. And Bentov, around that time, was also being monitored. Puharich was being monitored. And there's this big, like this circle of kind of his friends and colleagues were all claiming to be monitored, be followed, harassed, and so forth. And there was some story connecting a possible Israeli connection to this 1978 fire. But yeah, that's a big question mark. I mean,
and Bentov died in a plane crash.
Yeah,
I
that's
believe.
right. Yeah,
sort of super mysteriously. He was friends with a lot of the Stanford Research Institute and early psychic, research pioneers.
Yeah.
and claimed to have this kind of theory of everything. He writes a book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum, where individual consciousness is kind of a pinched node of some larger fabric of consciousness or something. And fascinating guy.
Yeah, they were close. Like I said, there's a couple tapes of them just like literally talking, and they would just record it, and they would talk about all sorts of things, mostly, you know, their shared interest in consciousness and stuff. But, you know, then there's this other theory that Puharich could have not been a double agent and simply just a spy and going to kind of pick off information, or, hey, we're buddies, we're into the same stuff, we should tape record our conversation.
Like he was CIA and Bentov was Mossad or something.
Yeah. But all I know is that stuff exists, and you can put it together how you want. But, you know, I've told a lot of people, and again, it's not because I sort of fear for, you know, anything, but we really don't. Maybe it's deliberate. Maybe we're not supposed to have found anything, but we don't have any sort of like legitimate document or anything that really nail. And I think that's what's interesting about the film and the story in general, is like, you still question, there's still research to be done into this, because we don't have the definitive answer of what's going on. We just have all these strange breadcrumbs over several decades that would point to.
Well, I think the most interesting, you know, pieces of media or journalism beget more questions often than answers, especially if you're cutting to, you know, the deeper architectures of reality.
Yeah.
And I often think you should be just kind of skeptical or distrust, you know, people who are like, they're so sure it's just X or it's just Y, you know, and in this case, it's clearly this kind of murky subject. But that, I mean, that makes it so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
That makes you just want to go deeper. And
I think that the sign too of the whole Geller thing being, like I mentioned earlier, like him being involved maybe willingly in these kinds of experiments, you know, but he really opened up. I mean, anyone can hear it. Maybe it's been taken down, but it was this radio interview from 2019, and he was very open about, you know, I was scared. And he always uses the term like, Puharich made me believe this. He made, you know, and he does credit Puharich, says, look, you know, I love the guy. He helped me. He helped me get to America. So it's not like he hates him or but he's very clear. Like, you know, at that period, like I was concerned about what was going on. He mentions being pretty sure that Puharich had slipped him the mushrooms. So, you know, there's that. I mean, I don't think he's making that up.
No.
I think it was like all these years later, I think he wanted to come clean or about like what he really experienced, is the vibe that I got from.
He's a wild character. He has a very flamboyant online personality. He'll often make these videos directed at world leaders. He'll be like, Trump, don't push that button, or Putin, stand down, or whatever, you know, I know what's going to happen, and he'll like predict the wild things happening. And
well, he was doing that in the 70s.
He was
like again, this idea that you could use this directed thought to change somebody's opinion or to change somebody's direction, or and then he talks a lot about doing that back then.
I have a friend who worked at the Princeton parapsychology lab, and whenever I try to throw the kitchen sink of skepticism around, like he's just a stage magician and he's, you know, I don't know how legit he is. He often said, you know, and I think they even have like some papers where they studied him at Princeton, and I think it's often, again, like these people have something that's a little anomalous going on, and they play it up, you know?
Yeah, that's really actually again, with everything I said prior to him potentially being the sort of subject, but no, I actually firmly believe that he was one of probably, you know, a lot of people out there, who have something. And again, it's just like, can you turn it on every time? Can you perform at every instant someone asks you? I mean, no, I'm not I mean, I don't know, but I would assume like you can't do it 100% of the time. Maybe you can do it 60% of the time.
Yeah.
But I think that about him because I've heard enough stories through all these people I've talked to and stuff who were like, yeah, he had something, you know. I think he liked the idea of the showmanship, but yeah, he definitely had something going on.
Speaking of people with gifted, you know, psychic abilities, who are the space kids?
The space kids are, well, there's a lot of them, and we only were able to track down and interview 1, 2, 3, 5 of them. But basically, when Geller was kind of blowing up, this was like mid-70s, early mid-70s, apparently the story goes that these kids all over the world, specifically in the United States and the UK and in China, which are just the stories that we were able to kind of look into. But these kids would see Geller on TV, and all of a sudden, like, that would cause them to just spontaneously, like, do something psychic. Like they would pick up a spoon, it would bend, or they would, you know, go into the room and the drawers would, you know, poltergeist stuff, right? And there's a ton of newspaper articles at this time, which again, like, okay, it could have all been a hoax, whatever, but, you know, it's like parents calling in the TV station, you know, Puharich claims, like, saying, what the hell's going on here? You know, my kid just did this, my kid just bent a spoon, my kid just, you know, touched the refrigerator and it short-circuited, you know, all sorts of stuff. And apparently it was because they saw him on TV and something happened, something clicked, and their psychic abilities just kind of like came out in that moment.
It's like a contagion of psychic powers.
Yeah. So that's apparently what was happening. And so Puharich, of course, you know, learns this and he's very intrigued. So he starts to, you know, visit some of these cases of kids who were doing this. And eventually, I guess, eventually he's so convinced that this is real and that these kids actually have this sort of like sudden emergence of ability that he brings them. Well, again, a lot of people have this idea, there's a lot online about how he like collected all these kids, almost like an X-Men kind of thing, which is partially true, but mostly like he would lecture in you know, all over the country, in Canada and places, and people, and we say kids, we're talking like teen, you know, early. Apparently there were like some very young, you know, 4, 5, 6-year-old kids, but the ones that we're dealing with in the film were all, you know, in their early 20s, maybe 18, youngest. But they would see him at a lecture, and they would approach him and say, hey, you know, we got to talk. Like, I have these abilities, and you are obviously the guy who knows about this, and I need your help, basically. Like, they would kind of go to him. So at that point, he thought, okay, there's enough stories and enough of these kids coming to me that, like, I should start a research program. And so that's when he sort of collects like a large group of kids. I think it was like, again, online, there's all sorts of stories, but it was really only like maybe like a dozen kids, I think, give or take. But he kind of invites them to Ossining, where he's, you know, living, and starts this sort of camp where basically they are just doing psychic research on these kids. And I think, again, not unlike the earlier Vinod Roundtable stuff, like a lot of conspiracy stuff pops up at this moment too, because of the general nature of kids showing up at the house of a, you know, known intelligence, connected scientist, et cetera, and so forth. But basically he collected them and just started this camp where they did, you know, kind of went through the different abilities, tested them, and that all led to getting back to the Nine, because a lot of these kids claimed they had some sort of encounter or you know, UFO experience. And so Puharich said, okay, kind of like grouped them. Okay, all the kids who've had an experience here, you know, not. And so all the kids that had an experience, he would hypnotize them and allegedly the nine would come through, even through these kids, who most of which never knew about the nine, and most of which were kids who, like, you hear a lot with these experiencers who, like, they didn't want to talk about it. You know, they didn't want, you know, fame, or they were just like, I'm actually scared and I want to know what's going on with myself. You know, they weren't trying to, like, you know, do anything more than, like, can you help me figure out what's going on?
After you've looked at this for 10 plus years, do you think that the nine coming through these different experiencers, abductees, people who've seen UFOs represent something real that's sort of, you know, non-human or extraterrestrial coming through these people? Or do you think that these were sort of synthetically implanted or kind of manipulated by Puharich?
I think I don't want to say synthetically created. I think what was going on at this time, and this is, we're talking 74 when this started, 73, 74. And keep in mind, this is right around the time the SRI remote viewing stuff starts.
Yeah.
And keep in mind how Puthoff tells us that he went to Puharich's house in Ossining, heard all about the nine, and that Puharich was apparently communicating with this thing called the nine.
Wild.
And then didn't really say much.
Has Hal Puthoff never talked about this? Or?
No. I mean, in the film he does.
I got to ask him.
But he basically just tells a story about, well, quite frankly, he was quite closed off when it came to the subject of all this, Puharich. So I don't know. I wasn't there at the interview. Someone else did it. I mean, it was great he did it. But he basically was like, Puharich was more connected than anyone ever knew. And
really,
he sort of alludes to that. But he does say, yeah, we went up to his house. There's footage of him and Targ at Ossining sitting on the front steps. So my theory is that, and people have talked about this and it's out there, but I think that there was this sort of, and we know for a fact that Puharich was part of the SRI program. A lot of people, Puthoff himself, say no, he wasn't. He just simply brought Geller and that was it. He disappeared. Not true. There's a pay stub in Puharich's archives that is from SRI to Lab 9, Puharich's lab, from 73.
Whoa.
We brought it up to Puthoff. He said, oh, who knows? It could have just, it's whatever. It's nothing, basically. But to me, that proves he was connected. Because I think the story most people read is just like, he brought Geller, dropped him off there, and was just like, you know, have fun, basically. But I think that Puharich's house, which was now called Lab 9, which again, like Intellectron and a couple others he had, which are no use getting into, but he just had these sort of like front companies, which I just think it's obvious, you know. So at this time he had Lab 9. And I think that Lab 9 was doing SRI research, you know, on children, because essentially a lot of the tapes are remote viewing. There's no other way to look at it. It's, okay, what's going on in this location? What time is this such and such general going to be at this place? When should we go here? And it was actually, speaking of Adam Curry, I think it was actually Adam who brought up this idea that, you know, a lot of people who go into a trance or hypnosis, you know, there's a protocol, right? It's either like a pendulum or whatever it is, a countdown. And I think the 9 and somehow like this, we're going to connect with the 9 thing was like a way that it was an in, if that makes sense, for some of these kids to sort of want to participate. Because again, it goes back to, if you really want to test like a kid's, a real, you know, 20-year-old person, is a 20-year-old a better psychic than an 80-year-old? You know, eventually you're going to have to find a 20-year-old and do an experiment with them. And I think what was happening was like, if you go to a 20-year-old and say, hey, you know, especially at the time with Uri Geller being famous, you know, whatever, Star Wars, this and that, and you say, hey, you know, do you want to be a part of an experiment where you can communicate with these, these beings, and, I can put you in it safe, and I can put you in this hypnotic state, and you'll communicate with them. Like, obviously you would say, oh, that's okay. That's interesting. That's cool. You're not going to say, hey, do you want to come be a part of a covert, mind control experience? You're not going to approach it that way. So that's my theory, is that was sort of his way. And one of the space kids, whose name I won't mention, she basically admitted that, where she said something to the effect a long time ago of like the Nine was basically just like this sandbox for us to, or some analogy like that, where the Nine was basically just like this sandbox for us to play in, or something. And again, it was off. It wasn't in the interview. It was like one of those many phone calls we had, and I always stuck with me. So I think that at that time, again, you've got the same years remote viewing experiments are starting at SRI. You've got the connection to SRI via some sort of pay stub going directly to Lab 9. And you've got all these young kids who on the tapes are doing remote viewing. So,
but the question I want to push you on this is like, remote viewing is used for the U.S. from 72 to 95 and probably now to like actually add to our intelligence abilities about real things, drop Russian nuclear bases, find hostages, whatever. Do you think that this Council of Nine were real, extraterrestrial or non-human beings communicating through these space kids? Or do you think the Nine was being implanted and they were testing their ability to sort of manipulate thoughts, and that was through the Nine or whatever, and they had some clearly they did have some abilities to do that.
The evidence would point to the latter. I mean, that's the best way I can answer that.
God, that's crazy.
And that would go back.
It's very deflating, I'm sure, for a lot of UFO.
Well, it is. And again, like, I don't want to come across as this like negative skeptic person, because I'm not. But again, it goes back to like, if you're trying to be serious and piece together the life of this guy that spans decades, like, and that's what you're hearing, that's what you have. That's
but what is, if you are saying some of the protocol to get people into this state involves saying, hey, you're contacting the Nine and whatever, and it's some protocol, and it sounds like a hypnotic technique.
Yeah.
But then some seem super open-ended and they just seem to connect with the Nine. How do you sort of make sense of that?
Well, I don't know. And that goes back to the kind of, I think Jeffrey Mishlove brings this up, of this sort of trickster element, the kind of paranormal phenomena where like sometimes they're tricking you, and sometimes it's real, sometimes it isn't. I think there was, with Puharich, like, again, it's always that question of like, where did he stand with like, is this real research that he passionately believes in, and he's trying to come to some sort of, reality of the ET phenomena, or was it just all MK Ultra? And again, I don't think it was all MK Ultra mind control stuff, but there's some gray area there that is so hard to pin down, because again, in some of these sessions, and this is strange, is that on some of the sessions, he'll be like, okay, here we are with this space kid, and their mom is here, and she's, this is like the tape recording we're hearing, and on those sessions, it's like, typical, okay, the Nine, the world is beautiful, we need to save humanity, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's other tapes that are like, what time is the best to remote view the Kremlin so we can get into the, So,
whoa,
yeah. Crazy. So I think there was a way of like, okay, I need to kind of, give an example to maybe other people around to say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. Okay, see, you sat in on a session, so now you know what it's like. And then when those people aren't around, it kind of gets to the serious stuff. Is again, this is what you're hearing what I'm hearing. It's all based off that. It's not like really my personal, hardcore beliefs. It's just like, oh, okay, this is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
I think anyone would kind of conclude that.
Yep.
But again, I think Puharich, like, and this is a big part of the film and a big part of my philosophy about him and his story is like, I think he believed, I know he believed in a lot of paranormal stuff, but I think he got sort of under the thumb of the, intelligence world early on. And I just don't think that he could kind of get away from that. And I think, you often hear it's like the mafia, like you don't just leave. And when you're that involved as he was, you don't just say, hey, I'm good, And so I think that there was a lot of pressure on him to do some of this negative stuff that he may have otherwise not wanted to do. And I think that's like a big part of the film, and what I wanted to kind of get across with it is there's so much negative conspiracy stuff about him out there. I mean, there's tons of it. Have you ever read the Stargate conspiracy, the book? It's really good. It came out in the 90s, and it was the first book that really talked about a lot. Like this book had the story that I told you about of the guy in Florida who woke up with the tooth implant. And this is the first book that really exposed, basically saying everything he ever did was intelligence involved. He's an awful person. He's an evil genius. But it's not true. And I think that I hope to get that across in the film, and I think we do, because like a big part of that research, I don't think he wanted to do. I think he in a way was forced to do it.
Yeah. And whatever this kind of amorphous blob that is the UFO legacy program that is always proverbially discussed, but, usually in a very kind of high level, fuzzy ways. I think that's probably the case with a lot of these people, is that they were kind of sucked up into, in certain cases, they probably came upon really exciting scientific truths that were converging on things that, some behind the Iron Curtain science, group in the U.S., during kind of Cold War secrecy era already knew. And they would recruit these people, and then they would probably be forced to, work on things in contexts that they weren't particularly happy about and didn't feel idealistic about. And
I'm sure that that's the case with him, because I don't want to, come across as someone who's trying to like put him out there, because I'm not. I mean, like, I got to know his family really well. I'm like very close with them.
Yeah.
And they were great when I showed them the sort of final product, which really gets into this stuff. And they were like, you did a good job because you didn't shy away from that. And I think, you illustrated it well. But, they were even like, wow, there's so much in here we had no idea about. Like, we literally had no idea. You're telling us stuff that we never even heard before.
Yeah.
And so that just goes to show his own family was in the dark about a lot of it. But, the Nine, again, like, I just keep thinking, I think about it a lot. And again, like, the answer just is, I don't know. But what I've heard and what I've had access to that came directly from his personal records would indicate that it was a made up thing.
Fascinating. Well, that in and of itself seems a little messed up, as does, slipping somebody mushrooms, or, telling them they've been abducted by aliens and taken aboard a ship when they haven't, or quote unquote teleporting them and throwing them through a window when they didn't, like, these things aren't cool,
No, and again, like, I think if anyone watches footage of Puharich, like, he's the most jovial, funny night, like, he's not this like monster person. And that's why I quite frankly think makes him like interesting and an interesting subject for a film, because like he's complicated, and he's again, I think, being sucked into these things that he would otherwise not want to do. And not to ruin the end of the film, but he basically like admits that he basically admits like that is what was going on with him.
Yeah. Well,
and he warns future researchers, basically, like, don't do what I did, essentially, is what his message is.
If you look at the Zimbardo prison experiments at Stanford or whatever, where these prison guards start to get really self-important, or Stanley Milgram's shock experiments, it's and then you combine that with the power of the CIA at the time. I'm sure you could get coerced into doing all sorts of things. And does that fully exonerate you? Like probably not. But it's I mean, I think the best version, which I think your documentary really gives, is the nuanced one, which shows how somebody could get incrementally walked into a position like that.
And there's just no question the level of how deeply connected he was to intelligence. I mean, there's a paper trail of it, so there's no way to kind of beat around that bush. I think, again, I've read so much online, and there's a lot of speculation, but at the end of the day, like, those people haven't seen the materials that we had.
So interesting. Were there any other experiments? They were obviously channeling. They were using these sort of Faraday chambers. They had this machine that produced tones. Any other experiments that they were doing with the space kids specifically?
Well, here's what's interesting is that, and you see in the film, like, getting back to this idea of the 9 being this kind of endpoint just to like get things done. In the 70s, we're talking 74 through 76, Middle East war, right, going on. And Puharich, and specifically Phyllis Schlemmer, he was still working with her then, but and all the space kids, they weren't specifically going on these trips, but they would literally have a session, right, with the 9. And they would do group sessions where it would be like, 2 people, Puharich and 2 other people, him and 3 other people, him and 6 other people. And that would apparently like bring the message through more strongly and so forth. But in that time, they're getting messages from the 9 saying, you need to go to Egypt, you need to go to, any, Middle East area, you need to go to Russia, and all these places which would otherwise be very difficult for somebody to just go to during that period. In fact, one of the guys working with Puharich at that time, John Whitmore, he was a British guy who got really involved. Like, he even says in an interview, like, you normally could not even get into these countries at this time, yet Puharich, with his psychic, were going constantly. Because the 9 said, you have to go here, you have to go there. And so he kind of hints at like, well, what was that really the 9? Or once again, was Puharich involved in something else that he had to be in these areas at this time, under the auspices that this was a psychic, this was the 9 telling them to go there. Phyllis Schlemmer completely questions everything. And, way later in her life,
really?
She did an interview. She said, he used the TD-100 machine on me all the time. I never knew what it did. I never questioned what it did. And so you just have to ask, like, how is it that Puharich is able to go to these places during that time, get into very specific locations, often involving very high-ranking government people, and it's all just, oh, hey, the 9 told us to come here, so we're here. And so a lot of people speculate, I've heard stories of, Christian missionaries who were actually spies and, something like that going on. Again, it's interesting to go down that road to think about it. Nothing we have like concretely proves that. But I just think like the more you listen to those tapes at that time and the more you just kind of put things together, like it does seem like, what if that was the cover? And, oh, this guy's so crazy, he actually thinks a psychic is telling him, oh, just let him go. What a kook. And meanwhile, he's, doing whatever he needs to do there.
Yeah, it's using the stigma of the science kind of in your favor as a cover for something more vital that clearly was actually working and functional.
And he actually on these tapes gives, this goes back to like the remote viewing stuff of like some of the questions that they're asking are like, what is the code name that, Russian guerrilla soldiers are using, so we then know what to pick up on when we hear this code name. So then that begs the question, why would an alien be like asking those types of questions if that's what you're supposed to be doing, talking to the Nine? But to go back to the constant contrast is like, he really was a genuine believer, because he would often go to the Great Pyramid in the same time and do like all sorts of experiments there.
Really?
And he just loved going there. Like, he was obsessed with the pyramid. He was obsessed with the history, all the Egyptian god. Like, so, that's not.
And there are specifically 9 Egyptian gods.
So that was something he was like obsessive about. We have tape recordings of him meditating in the king's chamber.
What?
In 76. And he did experiments with one of the space kids in the pyramid, and they brought through this information. Apparently they're channeling this Egyptian god, and some pretty weird information lined up during that session. So then that goes back to like, it's almost like, okay, I have to, do my job for the CIA, and on my off time, I can go in the pyramid and do some cool stuff I'm interested in.
Whoa.
That's just kind of what it seems, because like, again, there's no mind manipulation, dark stuff going on there. It's very clearly him like, I'm going to meditate in the king's chamber. Like, well, what does that have to do with, MK Ultra? So I just think like, and again, this goes to like his death and the mystery around that, where I think like there was a situation too where he may have been, on payroll for, XYZ intelligence agencies and going to do these things, but kind of using that time to do other things he wanted. And maybe that was, he shouldn't have done that,
You think they took him out as a result, maybe, of that?
Yeah, I think a part of it is that because again, he's going to Egypt, right? Because the Nine are saying, you have to go here, you have to go to this location to meditate, this and that. But I think he's going, okay, well, I'm already in Egypt, and there's the Great Pyramid, and I've been wanting to go in there anyways, so I'm already here, I'm going to go, but he's there maybe on a mission, and hey, don't screw around kind of thing. I think there was a lot of that going on. And his death is completely mysterious.
What happened?
You can see the stairway right for this window where my father allegedly fell down, and they found him right at the bottom of the stairs. We don't really know what killed him.
Well, so there's a couple of things. He was sick at the time, but not, I believe, not enough that would have caused this to happen. But basically, it was 95, and around this time, he was very vocal about his life. Like, he was doing these sort of lecture tours at sort of parapsychology conferences and stuff, and he was being very open about his past. And it was one of these lectures at that time where he said, look, I'll admit it. I worked for this part of the CIA. My boss was the guy who was directly involved with all the hypnosis, mind manipulation stuff.
Who is his boss?
He doesn't name his boss, but you know what? He might, actually. Let me think. He does. I have to think about it.
Did you figure out?
Yeah. I know it. Trust me. It's just in my crazy head, Puharich head. But I'll remember it. But basically, and so he says, yeah, that's what I did. I was a consultant at the time. And so he opens up about a lot of that stuff. He literally says, I can produce in your mind the image of an alien experience. His assistant at the time was a woman who was on this tape that Dick Russell recorded, I told you about, when Puharich was in the hospital. There's a part of the tape where Dick Russell goes outside. I think they're having a smoke or something, and he's just kind of like, hey, look, give it to me straight, like, what's going on with this guy? And she opens up too, and she says, yeah, he told me about things he's done, that he's worried for his life about things. She says he using flashing lights, using all of that stuff, was able to create the UFO experience. That stuff was all created, she says. So
what?
She was opening up about that on this tape, and so
he would like stage UFO is showing up as well.
I think what she was getting at is what we were talking about with this controllers idea, is that like kind of, I guess, more implanting the idea that you've had an encounter, or you've been abducted or so. Like, he was involved, basically making the point he was involved in that kind of stuff, that kind of research. And again, you got to ask, like, why, like, why was it always like the UFO thing? But all that was going on like right before he died. That tape was recorded less than a year before he died. But he was found at the bottom of the stairs. He fell, and he passed away. And at the time, he had all these. He was still, and again, this goes back to like, what did he really believe? He was still living with this group of like women who were like psychics, apparently, and they lived with him, and he was still like, doing stuff with them or whatever. But conveniently that day, no one else was there at the house when they were usually always at the house. And Puharich has this like weird legal pad that he wrote like very soon before this incident occurred, where he fell down the stairs, where he's basically like outlining why he thinks he's being monitored. He names people that he believes have come into his life who are there to basically harm him and take him out. And again, this is either like the work of someone completely paranoid, or somebody who's just totally telling the truth.
Well, it's right before he fell down the stairs mysteriously.
He claimed that this, and again, it makes sense because these psychic people would kind of like show up even to this day and be like, hey, you should study me and this kind of thing. So he was a nice guy again. So he would let people in and he would welcome them. And so he claimed that there was people like that who were actually, basically out to get him, and that they installed this ELF emitter in his television set. So when he would turn on the TV, he would get hit by this, ELF that would be, and he was a physician. He was a medical doctor. So he would know what was going on with his own body. And he writes in this legal pad, like, this is happening to me. I can tell. He would test himself every day.
Well, he also developed a lot of these techniques, right?
Yeah.
They're using what he developed on him.
Yeah. I mean, if this were to be believed, which I quite frankly do believe what he says in this, but he basically is this legal pad, and it's all these events kind of leading up to why he believes they're out to get him, basically, right? But coincidentally, the day he's found, there's no one at the house, and not right before that, but a few years before his death, he had been approached by the CIA to head up a ELF research department, basically. Again, he writes this. I've found some evidence to prove that this probably happened, but there was apparently a department being set up just to study ELF, weapons and so forth. Again, a lot of that was going on in the late 70s. And he said no, and apparently some argument ensued, and he said, get out of here, and because they came to his house. He's kind of recounting this in his notes. And the guy that he said came on behalf of the CIA to talk to him is a guy we know was involved in the CIA.
Who's that?
This guy named Bob Beck, who's in the film. And he was another Puharich type where he got roped into a lot of things I think he wasn't necessarily wanting to do. But so that happened where he refused that and said, no, get the hell out of here, etc. So all of that stuff was leading up to 95, and he was found dead. Coincidentally, the Stargate program ends in 95.
I literally made that connection in my mind. Yeah.
And coincidentally, this guy Grinberg, Jacobo Grinberg.
Yes.
Who, there's a great film, shout out to Ida, my friend. He made this great film about him. In 95, less than a month after Puharich dies, this guy disappears, Grinberg. And if you see the film, the story basically is he was involved in very similar research, basically was able to prove a lot of this psychic stuff was real. And to this day, they don't know what happened to him. That's still a missing person.
Did he ever meet Puharich?
Yeah, they met when Puharich was in exile in Mexico after his house was burned. They met in Mexico. In less than a month after Puharich was found dead, Grinberg disappeared. So again, what do you say? It's all a coincidence, and you move on, or you say there's something
so bizarre. Yeah, Grinberg, the whole thing about him is like he realized we live in a matrix, and then he had left the matrix or something. Like,
but what's interesting about him is like, again, it's literally still like an open case. Like they've never figured it out.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of people say, oh, he got sort of kidnapped by whatever government agency, and they're using him. And what's crazy is on some random message board. This was like years ago. I saw a post that was somebody like, I know for a fact that Puharich never died, and he was taken in by the government, and he's still alive, and someone I know. And the weirdest thing is, I was skeptical of that, but I was like, years later, I remember reading that, and I spent hours and days trying to find this mess, but I could not find it for the life of me. I tried everything I could possibly do, and I couldn't find it. So that was weird.
That's super weird.
Yeah.
So it just got erased or something.
I get, but that's like the real theory of Grinberg. Like, again, the doc is really good, but there's like actually, legitimate proof that like he was sort of taken by the government.
So that's what your friend who made the movie thinks, that he was actually taken. And
well, that's one of the theories that basically everyone involved in the story like agrees with, because everything just points to like that happening. So all that was 95. January 95 was Puharich's death. February 95, Grinberg goes missing. Stargate officially ends in 95. Government puts out newspaper articles all over the news. Stargate, there's nothing to it. It was all bunk. And keep in mind, Puharich at that time was lecturing about all of that and being honest, being open about all the experiments he did with, Stargate. So I think Annie Jacobsen alludes to it. Like, I just think it was this classic, he knows too much, and he can't be out there talking, and he's experienced too much, he knows too much, and it's not good. So
I could see them seeing him as a liability late in life. Maybe he feels remorse about some of the things that he did, and he's speaking openly. And
exactly,
they're probably just trying to accelerate the research in the black. What are some of the wilder testimonies of the space kids that you spoke to?
So basically, with the space kids, like, yeah, there were a lot. And again, the reason the film took so long, which to give myself credit for, because a lot of people are like, I can't believe it took you so long and this and that. But a lot of it was like just getting people to talk. Because, you could imagine these people like don't want to. And again, this is what, you hear a lot about this with the UFO abduction stuff. Like these people like weren't looking to be in the spotlight. In fact, they didn't want to be. It took about 2 years for me to basically earn the trust of these space kids who I now consider like good friends, but that's what took so long. And I always thought, like, in order to make a really cool film, like, you got to get these space kids. It's like Stranger Things in real life, like that's what would make this thing work. And so I was just like convinced we got to get these people, and we got 5 of them. But again, there was like a lot more. A few of them were like, never reach out to me again. I want nothing to do with this. So
what did they say? I mean, that's why 5 is amazing. What did they say?
Well, so basically, like, yeah, what I did was I somehow was able to track them down just basically through, like, in Puharich's archives and things there, and again on the tapes, like he would say a name or he would write their name. Well, actually, in fact, in one of his journals, he like wrote all the names of the kids at the time, so it's pretty easy to like Google people. But yeah, a lot of the ones we got were again after kind of talking to them and saying, hey, I'm trying to do like a level-headed portrayal of Puharich. I'm not some crazy conspiracy person. Like, after all that, yeah, they were really open, but, they basically talked a lot about like what it was like being at his house at that time, which again was kind of cultish. I mean, if you want to look at it that way, in the sense that like, other than the space, because there's just all sorts of Jack Sarfati being one of them, like him and his kind of group of physicist people would go up there. It was just kind of like like a hub of just all these people interested in this stuff would just go there and like hang out.
For people that don't know, Sarfati is a physicist who is pretty well respected and studied under, very impressive people who, were Manhattan Project, pioneers. And he has a model of time travel and warp drive physics.
Yeah.
And he lives in the Bay Area, and he's very outspoken, loves to call people schmuck. He's written about In the Hippies Saved Physics by David Kaiser, this MIT guy.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know he had any interaction with Puharich. That's amazing.
Yeah, he went to his house.
Because he also, I believe Sarfati, the way he got involved in this exotic physics that he ended up studying was he claims that as a teenager, he was in some gifted and talented education program, and he gets a call from the future saying, you're going to meet the others, you're going to work on like building UFOs essentially, which he believes his work touches on building UFOs.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who could keep up with, any top theoretical physicist in the world. Like he's a real physicist. He studied under Hans Bethe, at Cornell and stuff.
Yeah.
And he says he gets a call from the future, and then they tell him when he's going to meet the others, and then he ends up meeting Hal Puthoff like later or whatever, and it's this weird synchronicity. It's so strange. So he's interacting with Andrei Puharich.
Yeah. Well, it's a crazy connection I just thought of. In that story, the Sarfati story, quickly is, he got this call from this metallic voice, which is what some of the, what Geller claims this as well, actually. But
really?
Yeah. So he gets this call from metallic voice. That was some sort of, alien intelligence. But, I don't know if you remember his part of the story where I think it was his dad or his uncle or something was involved in the army or army intelligence. And one of the people that he knew through a family member that was connected was this guy, Wilson Green. He brings up this guy, Wilson Green. And that guy, Wilson Green, was working with Puharich in the 50s at the Roundtable doing everything they were doing there.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So did you ever ask him point blank, hey, Jack, like, was any of your stuff, do you think it was seeded by these sort of,
it could have
mind
been
control people? Or
I mean, I think like he's open about that being a possibility as far as
he is.
Yeah. But I just remember him bring up that name, and in Puharich's journals, like he has one where he's kind of listing all these people. That's when I first told you about the Townsend Braun connection.
This is insane.
Yeah.
This is the craziest thing. Yeah, to tell everybody about this.
Well, in one of his journals, it was just him recounting, like he would often go to DC for like meetings.
Puharich would.
And this is early 50s again, which weird that the same year you're channeling the Nine, you know, in your lab, you're going to DC to meet with all these people, but he would just like keep very meticulous journals about what he did, where he went, who he met. And he would just like, hey, I met this person today for lunch, met that person. And so, yeah, Wilson Green comes to mind because he had something to do with, I think it was the Army's Psychological Warfare Department. And that's the same guy Sarfati references. But in these journals, he mentions meeting Townsend Braun and spending the day with him. And it's very brief, unfortunate. Actually, maybe we could do this together. There's part of the page that's like so worn, you can't really like read what it says, but it's kind of a, you know, a brief mention that he met with Braun and spent the afternoon. He says something like spent the afternoon with him to discuss a lot or something like this.
I know some kid who like helped, I think it's called the Vesuvius Project, and he helped decode this ancient papyri. And so if he could do that, hopefully he could get us this, you know, this transcript. That's crazy.
So he met him, and this was, again, I'm positive it was 53 was that journal. So yeah, he was going there. So yeah, that's how I found that out.
And it brings up all these questions of like, were people like Werner von Braun and Braun's ideas somehow seeded by like MK Ultra adjacent things? Like probably not, because you have like, you know, Werner von Braun goes way back to like, you know, early journal. He's clearly like a, you know, a rocketry genius, like, you know, as a young kid, was way into this, like, you know, like in his teenage years, or was like, you know, if you think about like what would be one of the main use cases of MK Ultra, it would be like keeping secret science sort of on lock, maybe creating some sort of cult dynamics around it, wiping people's memories when they work on really sensitive shit. Who knows? And Townsend Braun, to me, obviously, I'm very high conviction in his stuff. The audience will give me shit because I talk about him all the time. But I think he's like the godfather of American kind of, you know, in the black, dark science, like whole tech trees that come from anti-gravity or extended electrodynamics or fifth dimensional physics, I think kind of arise from Townsend Braun. And so I wonder what that meeting was like. The time then was weird overall. I think what people don't realize about the 50s is like there's a letter between, I think it's Claude Shannon, who invented information theory, was at Princeton. Information theory is the basis of all modern computation. And William Shockley, who invented the modern semiconductor, you know, Bell Labs, essentially. And it was a letter, and he goes, you know, my friend, you have to meet my friend. He's really interesting. You know, he's into all this, you know, interesting science stuff or whatever. And it turns out he's talking about L. Ron Hubbard. And so the point is like, it's this weird time where the intersection between the types of people who'd be engaging in like bizarre seances, ESP, paranormal stuff, that wasn't outside the Overton window like it is today.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, anyway, how would you speculate on, have you speculated on the connection between Townsend Braun and Puharich?
Nothing more than just they were probably interested in similar things. But it's odd because he said it was in DC. So Braun was there for whatever reason. Well,
Braun was probably deep intelligence. I mean, there's a story of Townsend Braun engaging in a UFO crash retrieval in, I think it's in the late 50s. And it's like, I think Hartford, Connecticut. And this like green glowing object that seems like it's losing mass gets collected by a professor there named Robert Braun. It then ends up at Moonwatch at Harvard, which is connected with Blue Book. And Robert Friend and J. Allen Hynek have possession of this, you know, material. And Townsend Braun walks in to Harvard, flashes his credentials, and takes the material. And like that, you hear stories like that time. You have telegraphs that I think, or telegrams that his daughter, I think has. I know this, I think, through this amazing researcher on Townsend Braun named Jan Lundquist. And I think she says that there's a telegram between William Stevenson, who's the inspiration for James Bond, for Ian Fleming. He's Churchill's super spy, who was like, you know, coordinating with Wild Bill Donovan, the OSS. He was like as high up as it gets when it comes to intelligence. And there's a telegram from him to Josephine, who's Townsend Braun's wife, because Townsend Brown had flown behind enemy territory, parachuted into Nazi Germany in 1945 to interrogate some scientists because he was an expert in all this stuff. And this telegram says, from William Stevenson, your husband is okay. He's been injured, but he's okay, and he's on his way back to the U.S. or whatever. So I can give you like 50 other stories like that. Like Curtis LeMay. I mean, his daughter said, I think on the phone with me, Linda Brown says Curtis LeMay chases Townsend Brown down the stairs because he's so interested in his inventions and stuff. And so this guy was like as deep as it gets when it came to the American intelligence and military elite. So it would make sense if Puharich was as well on the kind of the psychic, vector. And maybe if all of this stuff is being coordinated at a higher level than we understand, and there's some spooky science stuff and the anti-gravity connects with the psychic stuff and nuts and bolts, like they all kind of materials, they all kind of connect at the top. Those two guys seem like very central nodes.
And I think there's a lot of similarities with what you said, this idea of like flashing credentials and walking in play. I mean, I could give you 50 examples of Puharich doing that kind of thing that I've heard. And so and I think like the journals that mentioned Braun and these others, like I don't think these were sort of meant to be seen, these were like buried in his records. In fact, like in the film you'll see like his assistant at one point kind of mentions this idea that like not long before he passed away, like he had made mention like these papers I have in my house someone needs to take them. I don't trust giving them to my children for their safety. And so I think this is stuff that was not supposed to be read, or seen.
It's amazing.
There's a lot of other names. I researched them all. He met with Dulles. I guess I didn't mention that.
Wild.
He literally again in the journal he's like, says something like, was in the waiting room for an hour and finally got in and we talked. And so obviously you're up to something serious if you're doing that.
You're meeting with the third director of the CIA who, it's wild. I mean, if anybody was kind of running the government behind the government, it was Dulles. So do you, some of the wilder testimonies.
Yeah, the space kids. So they just basically recounted a lot of like what they experienced, a lot of the channeling sessions. So a wilder story is this one of the space kids, his name's Jaime. He's from Mexico City, great guy. And again, he was somebody who would never have wanted to appear in a documentary, like his life was totally fine. He didn't need to talk about this, but he did because eventually he told me like, if you're willing to like tell the real story, like I'll talk, because he knows like I did, there's just so much like BS stuff out there about Puharich and everything. But he told me a story about he was at one time he was doing an experiment with Puharich's assistant, this woman who's in the film. They were doing an experiment. They were meditating together, and they were sitting in a room together, both meditating, and he says that at one point she got up and she went over to him and she touched his forehead with her finger. And when she did that, this big blue ball, I guess this like ball of energy, as he describes it, appeared. Next thing he knew, he came to, she was all the way across the room against the wall, and he was back up against the wall, and he doesn't remember what happened. And the last thing he remembers is that she touched his forehead, some sort of burst of blue light. She flew across the room. And he told me that, and he said, look, you can talk to the assistant, like she'll corroborate this. And I did, and she did. And his theory was just like some connection, must have been occurring. And what do you do with that? Because something I learned, which was very bizarre, because this was another thing that Puharich didn't kind of open up about until way later in his life. Is he says, and again, this is not me or speculation or making something up, like he says in his own words, he invented this prosthetic finger that would have a chip with a certain ELF frequency that would emit from it. So when you touch somebody's forehead with this, it would be the exact frequency that would like knock them into the hypnotic state they needed to be in order to do channeling. And so he could basically just like, I could go like this to you and you would fall into the thing. He says that. One of the kids says, yeah, I remember that. So was this instance with Jaime and the finger something to do with that? What was it not? I don't know, but that's one of his stories. That was really bizarre.
Any UFO related stories?
Yeah, there was a lot of, there were a couple, like the classic, you know, right now there's a UFO that's sort of hovering over this session, and some claim to have witnessed that. There was a few stories like that.
So that would be in the, like, his protocol, like he'd be saying that, or like they'd
No,
be
like
like
they-
automatically channeling that?
That would be like apparently the Nine, you know, saying this through them. Yeah. But then there was a lot of
But like, if we're to get super concrete about this, like, is that him beaming the message, right now there is a UFO, you know, above our head? Or is it like creating some weird protocol and then like what happens to them and we have no idea where that content is coming from?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's strange because a lot of these sessions are very long. Like some of them are literally like 2 hours long, you know? And it's just, I hate to say, like, it's kind of like you just need to hear it to kind of like, to understand, because it's just, it really is mind boggling, because I constantly go from like, this is an experiment. This has been to like, oh no, this is like literally he's making contact with an extraterrestrial.
Say you were to suspend disbelief entirely and just take the contents of the Nine at face value. How would you characterize these nine beings and what they want for humanity?
Well, it's like I said before, they speak a lot about this idea that we have the ability of destroying ourselves, you know, and that if there's a way they can prevent that, then they want to. And they talk a lot about nuclear bases and this kind of thing that, you know, we hear a lot about now. They kind of say like, we're kind of behind a lot of the sightings that are occurring at nuclear bases.
But now I'm like, you're making me think this shit's real. the reason I'd love to be cynical about it, but like the nuclear stuff has been going on since the 40s. There's this guy Bud Clem. There's this UFO and nukes documentary. It's all based on Robert Hastings' great work in his book. It's really good. And I made kind of a, you know, another little thing with Robert Hastings on my channel. But you have this guy Bud Clem as early as 1945 in Hanford, where he's talking about these fireballs in the sky. And they did this Project Twinkle, which was deleted from the Air Force archives. Lincoln La Paz, this meteorite expert at University of New Mexico, is talking about green fireballs that seem intelligently propulsed, flashing, that like aren't explained by anything prosaic. And just like the nuclear connection is so ubiquitous. And then you're telling me the Atomic Energy Commission gave him money.
They gave him like over $1 million.
Yeah. So like if I were them, I'd be like, try to tap into what the hell is, you know, controlling.
Well, dude, this is a crazy rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Obviously. What was I going to say? You know, now you're entering what I've been in for like years of this constant, like, wait a second, now I think this, because, there was a lot of, well, you know, the classic thing where like with UFO disinformation, they often say like some of it, you know, some real stuff is sort of peppered into.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was that kind of thing too, where like maybe there was real, ET UFO related research going on with some of this mind control stuff peppered in just to throw off the course.
Well, what connection did you just make when I said the Atomic Energy Commission thing?
What I was thinking was, there is, I think I sent you something about this guy a while ago, and I have to say now I don't know enough, so I don't want to go too much into it, but there's a guy, his name's Oliver Reiser. He was a philosophy professor at University of Pittsburgh in the 60s and 70s, and he wrote a book called Cosmic Humanism, which I've only read some of, but it's basically this idea, like his whole worldview is this idea that like everything in the world is just run on frequency, tone, sound. He thinks it's like the universe is all sound. And that's how, that's how like interstellar travel works. That's how all psychic stuff, where it all comes back down to this, sound, tones. Again, there's this big connection here with this tone stuff. But anyways, Puharich knew this guy. They exchanged like dozens and dozens of letters. But this guy's theory, Reiser, was, the ability to communicate with, ET, UFO is through tones, through sound. And he was like, again, so complex, like I can barely understand it. But him and Puharich would exchange these letters that were like, two masters going back and forth about this stuff, like diagrams, charts, math. And like, you got to think like they obviously were like onto something. And again, this goes back for the 100th time of like Puharich's real interest in this stuff. But Reiser, this was his theory, that the way to communicate with, non-human intelligence was essentially through tones and through sound. And so you get Puharich, doing that basically, where he's using tones and sound with space kids. And while they're in a trance, there's a lot of experiments where like, I'm going to play this certain tone, and can you kind of like connect with that tone while you're in this hypnotic state? And can you follow that tone? Where is it bringing you? And what do you hear now? All sorts of stuff like that. So I guess what I'm getting at is maybe there was some real research there that had to do with something that wasn't just, a mind control thing, because this guy Reiser was brilliant. I mean, in his obituary, Albert Einstein said he was like, a genius.
Is that true?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Albert Einstein said like Reiser he had some quote about him being, this genius.
That's insane, because Reiser talks about like parapsychology and mind matter stuff.
Yeah.
And you'd think of Einstein as being totally opposed to
Well, I think with
like
Reiser, like a lot of guys, like he started doing more, quote unquote legitimate research, but he got obsessed with this, again, this theory of tone, sound, connecting the universe.
Wow.
This is how everything works. And so him and Puharich were exchanging a lot of letters about like, do you have the ability to create such and such a tone, and at what speed should it spin within the, complex stuff, but would lead me as a layperson to think like, okay, clearly they're talking about something serious here,
That's so fascinating.
So
and the Atomic Energy Commission funding it, I find
same years, literally the same years he's exchanging letters with Reiser. 63, 64.
Yeah.
That's when he gets the contract from Atomic Energy Commission. I mean, it's all it's a paper trail.
And the 50s UFOs showing up around nuclear bases is this ubiquitous thing. It's constant. It's all over various CIA, Air Force documents. I sort of document a lot of this stuff. Hastings documents it. It was definitely a thing. In 64, there's a famous case at Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Oh, yeah.
With a guy, a photo instrumentation specialist named Bob Jacobs. So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So yeah, it just points back to this idea that I he was genuinely interested in paranormal, research and in UFO. I mean, it's not just like all of that was fake.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think it got muddled at some point.
Yeah, and like maybe there's somebody like typing out, what these space kids are channeling, and then it's converted into this ELF frequency and it's transmitting to the, space kid's brain or whatever.
Well, it's weird you say that because on a lot of the tapes, there's mention of coupling to the computer data bank is often a term that is thrown around a lot. And this idea that there are some sort of computers involved.
On which end, though? Because are they recording what they're saying?
No,
and then
what you just said. Somebody's
Whoa.
typing something.
Whoa!
Because they often say.
Well, now I'm back in the more cynical camp where it sounds like mind control.
At one point, he said that the referring to the channel being the person. At some point they will become a more reliable source of data, and there's a lot of talk about that. And again, like what we have are tapes and tons of them and hundreds of hours. So like all you can do is piece together.
Well, what did the space kids think? Do they think that they were genuinely tapping into 9, non-human entities or extraterrestrials, or do they think that they were tapping into like some dude on the other end? Like, because a lot of them probably know the history that at this point.
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's really the best way to approach it because they were involved firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, to answer from what I know is I actually discovered things about, what I'm talking about with these more sinister connections that they did not know, in fact. One of the space kids who I'm close with, like, yeah, she was like, shocked. Because again, what they didn't understand, what I think a lot of people didn't understand who were involved in this project is like information. I was getting information like as recent as like 6 months ago about things that I didn't know that were like really important to the story. Like this guy, Bob Beck, who was most certainly CIA, who was at Austining at the time of these exact Space Kids experiments. This one of the space kids was like, I never even knew that. Like, you're telling me this for the first time. So it's a mix between, I think, to be quite honest, I think a lot of them want to believe that what was happening was genuine. And I think they want to remember the time they had there as a positive time. And they don't want to go down the negative path, or they don't maybe want to accept that the negative path may be, the reality. And I would probably do that. So I think some of them want to just try to say, hey, look, we were told, we were talking to the 9, we were communicating with the 9. It was a good time. We were young, we were free, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of them have become more open, like the guy from Mexico City I told you, where I think some of the things that I told them made them say, wait a second, I didn't know that. And all of a sudden, after all these years, they themselves are going, wait, what is that? And whose name is? And they're starting to put pieces together that they never thought about. And they're starting to maybe think at least, okay, something else was going on. What was it? We don't know for sure, but I think they're willing to accept like something else was going on back then.
One of the trippiest people that interacted with Puharich, who he probably had plans for, and it almost seems like the subject of some, kind of maniacal experiment, is Valerie Ransone.
Yeah.
Who is she?
Well, I wish I knew who she was. She's like the most elusive person I've ever come across. I think she's the most elusive person in this whole UFO history. So basically what I do know is that she was working in the White House during the Nixon administration. And it had nothing to do with like intelligence, or maybe it did, but it had nothing to do with intelligence or anything. It was some sort of program to, I can't remember. It was sort of like a SNAP benefits type program. It was something like this, but that's how she was, involved in government. Was she was part of a program like that. But apparently, she became very interested in the UFO topic. She became very good friends with Gordon Cooper, and she claimed to be a space kid, I guess. Like she claimed to be able to like channel information. And so she somehow wound up at Puharich's lab 9 in 78. And she is very, there's nothing there about her. There's nothing out there about her. There's a couple of people I know about who have been trying to track her down for years. They can't. Apparently she's still alive. But she basically, I believe, was extremely deep in the whole UFO thing, and I think knew a lot. We have a tape recording of this guy Elvis Starr, who was very, very high up. I can't remember his exact role. He was like maybe head of the army in the 60s, some high up role in the army. But anyways, he was very, very connected. There's pictures of him with like every, president during the 60s, 70s. Like there's a tape of him saying like, I met Valerie Ransone in the White House. She believes she was in touch with extraterrestrials, and he kind of makes a joke like, what do I know? Maybe she was. But that kind of firmly places her in that circle, because there's a lot of speculation about like what's true and what's not true. But this was a very legitimate guy basically placing her.
What was his role exactly?
He was, so from what I understand is, he was like the head of Army something or other. And then he went on to become the president of like West Virginia University. But he was a part of all these like weird science companies and weird energy companies that were happening in the late 70s. Like there's this company called Magnetic Energies LLC or something that Valerie had some sort of connection to. And this guy was like consulting for that, or he was connected to a lot of like weird stuff, basically. And there's very little on him other than his more official kind of government roles. But he has this, because he was writing a memoir. And we found this tape where he was kind of like dictating what he was writing. And he says, I met her. She was in the White House a lot. She knew a lot of people. But she just claimed that she could communicate with UFOs that were giving her advanced information that she, in effect, had to pass on to like important scientists. She predicted the failure of one of these rocket launches in the late 70s that actually did occur.
Which
I don't know. You have to
That's
look it
so
up.
great. What oh wow.
So basically she was there, but the kicker is like she was also really involved in a lot of Tesla technology research, a lot of ELF research, and a lot of people who I know who were including the space kids were like, she was connected. She was extremely mysterious. We have no idea what was going on with her.
So they remember seeing her around.
Yeah.
And she was somehow like, do you know what role she had in the White House or?
No, other than this guy, Elvis Starr, basically saying like, I met her on numerous occasions at, inside the White House. You can look it up. I can look it up too. I'm sorry, I don't remember, but it was some program that she like ran in DC and as part of the Nixon administration, which again was not like involved in an intelligence thing, but that was her like in with that world.
And she had some NRO involvement too?
Yeah, Jacques Vallée is the only one I know who wrote about it, but he claims that he spoke with her back in that late 70s time, and she was doing some sort of work for the NRO and experimenting with satellites and messages from satellites to people. And I'm telling you, man, I mean, I've tried to, the other film I'm doing, which is a whole other thing, but she's really involved in that. And that's how I got into her, because we have a tape recording of her. That was a phone call that was recorded. But if there's like any crazy enigma in this world that someone needs to like get to the bottom of, it's her. And I don't know if they ever will, because I've certainly tried hard to. And apparently she's still alive.
She's still alive?
Yeah.
Oh, you got to go find her, man.
Well, I think we kind of know where she is and stuff, but it's really just strange. She was very involved with Gordon Cooper, and again, he had started some company as well that was some like Advanced Energy LLC or something. And so from what I understand, she was kind of like going around, and even Jacques says this, like she was just trying to create this network of high up government individuals and people to kind of like start getting interested in advanced technology, Tesla technology, ELF stuff. But all the while she claimed to be, a space kid and able to receive information and channel information. And
so trippy.
Yeah. And there's a guy, Kit Green. He, I mean, I don't even care anymore at this point about saying stuff like this. Like I was talking to him for a while and he was like, yeah, I can't be involved in anything that mentions Puharich. It's too controversial. And then he told me that he knew Valerie Ransone really well and that he was like, I don't know much about him. Again, I'm not trying to cover because I'm like nervous or anything. I genuinely don't really know. I just know I've heard a lot about him being like a person who helps like abductee people who claim they're abducted and stuff. So apparently he was doing that even back then with Valerie, and he was working with her, which I don't know what that means exactly. But he was very, I mean, there's something out there online that's very, open where he talks about this, I think. But anyways, I was like, hey, I'm trying to do this Valerie thing. He was just like, yeah, no. And like basically like, don't talk to me again. And anything revolving that name, I can't be associated with. And,
Wow.
And every single person I've talked to who knew Valerie or had same reaction. Yeah. I'm literally like, I wouldn't go there. Or you should just kind of stop now. And I've gotten all that stuff.
Whoa.
So like, what's going on?
What do you think? Do you have it? Well, so first of all, a little context for the audience. Kit Green, deeply involved. He's a CIA psychiatrist and doctor. And
I knew that, but after all that stuff, I don't really know like what his.
He's deeply involved in like I think whatever CIA files around biological interactions from people interacting with UFOs that was given to Gary Nolan in the like mid 2010s. I think that was given by Kit Green, and Kit Green analyzed them alongside Gary Nolan. But he's like a longtime guy who kind of pops up in UFO lore, kind of akin to Hal Puthoff, but really seems to be as deep as anybody, specifically on kind of the psychological kind of neuroscientific dimension of this whole thing. So what do you speculate as to what Valerie?
Well, yeah, I have a couple of things, but yeah, the Kit Green thing again. I did talk to him. I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. I just think it's just another example of someone who's like, oh, her, yeah, I can't be involved. Like you're better off like not going there, kind of thing. So a couple of speculations. Firstly, and this came from someone named Bruce Erickson, who's this kind of like new age researcher guy who I know, who's really cool, but he knew Valerie really well. And he painted her in the same light as like, she always happened to be there whenever something was going on. She always happened to travel with no issues, no money issues. She was always anywhere she needed to be. But he speculates that she was sort of like a spy and the type that would maybe sleep with somebody for information. And a lot of reasons that these men in particular don't want to talk about her is, I don't need to say it. Maybe something happened. Now they're married. They don't want to go there. Maybe that's why it's this very standoffish thing, which I can get that. But that was his theory. Because apparently she was really good. I mean, there's one photograph that I know, literally one that exists of her. That's not true. There's one online, and there's one that I have in the Puharich archives of her at Lab 9. And, she was very good looking. So that was this one theory, is that she was kind of like getting information on behalf of who, I don't know. But this, you hear about that happening, sleep to that kind of thing. So that was what this guy said who knew her well. That was his theory. But the other theory is that she was, again, with the same idea of being an attractive woman, was able to lure in individuals to help with funding for certain projects and, hey, I'm a part of this thing, you should be a part of this thing. Because again, she was always on these boards of these sort of weird energy companies and things like that. But the really weird thing is, I don't know if you've seen it, there's allegedly an interview of her on YouTube. So you probably know this YouTube account, Eyes on Cinema.
Oh, yeah.
So anyways, on there, this one day, this was not even that long, it was like a year ago, this video pops up and it says Valerie Ransone like describes her UFO experience. You can go, anyone can go right now and look it up. And I was like, holy shit, like that's her. I've never seen, again, there's one picture. And I'm like, oh my, this is crazy, right? So in the interview, it's really bizarre. She tells us really weird. And the thing is, it checks out of what we know from her. And most of the information is from the Forbidden Science books, Jacques Vallée stuff. And, you know, she says, I was going to school in Northern Illinois in this interview. She says she moved to Houston. We know Jacques met her in Houston. The point is, everyone I know who knew Valerie, I said, oh, this is great. A video exists of her now. Sent it to them. Hey, look, here's Valerie. Like, can you believe this? No, that's not her. Nope, that's definitely not her. I knew her. That's not her. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense because like everything she says in the video checks out to what we definitely know. Nope, not her. Not one person. And even this.
Do you think they were like, they just, again, didn't want to?
I don't know, but it's just, it goes back. She's the biggest enigma in this whole world. Every single one of them. Nope. Oh man. What, you know, anyone who thinks that's her is an idiot. But everything she says checks out. And in the video, she tells this crazy story about how she had a UFO experience when she was a kid in college and her friends saw it. And then after that, she continued to have bizarre sightings of UFO sightings happened to her in her life many times. And then some guy, you got to see the video. She says this guy shows up one day to her job and is like, hey, you know, I want to take you. I can't remember exactly what she says, but basically this very mysterious guy shows up. They go out to lunch and he's like, you know, I know that you've had these UFO experiences, and he spouts all this stuff about her that no one would otherwise ever know, like stuff about her family. I know you had this UFO experience at this time in this location. So she's shocked, right? So then she says she gets into the car with this guy because he's driving her home or something, and he gets a tape cassette, puts it in the car, and the tape cassette starts, and it's a voice, a metallic voice, basically saying, you know, I'm an ET. And I'm here on Earth on like a humanitarian mission, and we want you to work with us. You're going to be the first test human to work with us. And you know, do you accept this position? And then the guy parks and she gets out or whatever. And she starts to question, okay, what's going on here? Like, was this real? Was this guy trying to like recruit? That's her story. And then after that is when all this stuff happens of her getting involved with Puharich. This was like early 70s. She claims this happened. And all this stuff that we know about is, you know, late 76 and 77, 70. So that's her like origin story. But apparently it's not her. According to everyone who knew her, oh, that's not her. That's not the right woman. That's not even what she looks like.
So wild.
But on the tape recording we have, which is a recorded phone conversation, the voice on that, which is most definitely her, sounds, it's her in this video. It sounds just
the same.
It sounds like that voice.
So it's probably her.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
So that's a rabbit hole in and of itself. But basically, yeah, she spent like a good amount of time at Lab 9. And she brought Gordon Cooper there. And then she disappeared. And everyone who knew her was like, yeah, I have no idea what happened to her. Or they're just straight up don't want to talk about her. I don't know. It's really bizarre. She wrote some book that's basically all this like channeled information that she got.
Have you read it?
No. Well, I've skimmed it, but I think you used to be able to buy it on some odd website, which is now down. But it's very, very strange. And when I was trying to get in contact with her, I weirdly, this is a crazy story. This guy got in touch with me completely out of the blue, and this has happened a few times throughout the making of this, where like someone is like, "Hey, I heard you have Puharich's archives. I'm really interested in him, and what do you have? And we should talk and that kind of thing." This one guy, weirdly, right around the time I was trying to try to track down Valerie, he reaches out to me, and he's like, same thing. "Hey, I know I'm a researcher, and I heard your name about Puharich and this and that." And he's like, "Have you heard of Valerie Ransone?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, would you want to talk to her? Because I'm actually in contact with her." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And so he forwards me an email, which is allegedly from Valerie, which is like, "Hey, let's talk and this and that." And one thing led to another, and this guy just completely disappears, right? Never heard from him again. I look him up on Facebook, and again, maybe I'm crazy and this stuff has gotten to my head, but his Facebook looks like the quintessential "I'm making a fake Facebook account.
Yeah.
This isn't me" kind of thing.
Sure.
And that, again, I'm very level-headed. That it really like spooked me out. And then years later, we're talking probably probably like 2016, 17. I'm talking like, not that long ago, like 2021, he reaches back out to me and is like, "Hey, what's going on with the film? And is there any way I can see it? And hey, did you ever talk to Valerie? If you want, I can try to get," and I just never responded to the guy again. It was really strange.
Wow.
And I tried the email that he had that he claimed was Valerie's. Of course, it weird.
But well, what happened when you emailed
Oh,
Valerie?
no, nothing.
Okay.
It didn't kick back, but I just never,
You never got anything
I
back.
never got anything back ever. Yeah.
But you think you've located her?
Yes.
And you're going to try to interview her?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you do, man. That would be incredible.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to get into it with her, but that's the gist of it. And just the fact alone that Kit Green was involved with her back in the late 70s is really strange.
So strange.
Yeah. So
And oh, man,
early 80s. Yeah.
This is crazy. It's like there's a woman in the Nixon White House who claims she's channeling aliens and also happens to be on the board of all these sort of, spooky science outfits that seem to stem from exotic Tesla, extra low frequency technology. It's really wild.
And what I can say for a fact is like in the late 70s, there really was like so much unknown about this potential of like radio frequency weapons. And it's on YouTube. There's a whole CNN special, which came out a little later. I think it was like 83, but it was kind of detailing all the research that had gone into like, those types of weapons and, radio towers that can beam a certain frequency that can agitate people and et cetera. So that was kind of like the Wild West in the late 70s there of like, I think people trying to figure out what this is, what can be done with it. And he was just like in the middle of that. And, there was a lot of people running around researching that at the time. And I think there was also a lot of research happening of, what's the potential of this stuff? What's possible with it. And Valerie was, again, interested in that and was involved in that. So
it's so wild. What are the implications for all of this on modern UFO disclosure, which seems to usually emphasize kind of aerospace contractors, secret, nuts and bolts, weapons technology, faster than light travel, that sort of thing. What are the implications of the stuff you're looking into for that?
I think I think it's more of the same that we talked about earlier, where I think there's some truth peppered into a lot of, false going on. And I think that still happens, I think that's still going on. So, I think the implications are it's just still difficult to navigate what's real and what is not real, you know? And I think it takes people, you know, like you and others who are like really seriously interested in looking into this stuff and talking to people to kind of like keep going with it, you know?
Yeah, well, this is I mean, if they're, you know, it's a big puzzle that we're putting together. This is a huge piece that I think is missing for a lot of people, you know, prior to your movie. So I really hope people go check it out. I think it's going to be, you know, make a lot of waves and update a lot of people's understanding of this whole topic. And I loved it. I thought it was really well made.
Thanks.
How can people go find it?
Well, it's going to be for purchase on, you know, iTunes and YouTube and that kind of thing. Yeah, we're going to do kind of like this release now with Age of Disclosure.
Okay.
We're going to do like a, you know, you can purchase it for a certain amount
A little
of time.
bundle situation.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But there's some interest in some streaming stuff, so.
And anything big that I didn't touch on that I should have asked?
Honestly, like, yeah, probably, but
Dude, I mean, you're a gift that keeps on giving, man. It's crazy.
The one thing I was going to mention is this is again an example of something like very recently, like Bobby Ray Inman.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people are talking about right now. I called him because he was head of naval intelligence, I think, during this exact time that Puharich is doing a lot of space kid stuff, like late 70s into the early 80s, and a lot of ELF stuff. And I just called him straight up and I introduced myself.
How'd you get his number?
I found his number online.
What?
Yeah. I kid you not. It's one of those classic white pages sites where it was like a bunch of different numbers. And I'm like, none of these are ever going to work. And I was like, hello? And it was him. It was one of them.
Oh my God.
And he was pretty nice, but I just straight up was like, hey, have you ever heard, you know, the name Andrei Puharich? Do you know Bob Beck? Because those are the two working at that time with the space kids. And he was like, nope, never heard the name. And he was really nice. And he was just like, if you come across anything more concrete, you can call me back. But I just figured, maybe he knows something, because we know naval intelligence at one point was like a big funder of Puharich, not only back in the 50s, but going into the early 80s as well. But anyways, he didn't.
That's what Harold Malmgren always said. He said the deepest, you know, kind of core was the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence. They really knew the most about this stuff.
Yeah, Puharich was in with them very early on, and he continued. In fact, there was a scientist working with Puharich at this time, Elizabeth Rauscher. She passed away, but they got like this huge grant from the ONI. And I was like, you know, looking everywhere to try to find Doug. She has a huge archive at Berkeley of all of her research. And I had someone go there and look, and we couldn't find anything. But you know, they were working with a lot of people then. But yeah, Inman didn't come up with anything. So yeah.
Well, he might have reasons to withhold information as well. He was I think, deputy director of the CIA and the director of the NSA at the same time, I believe.
Yeah, so something like that. The other thing, the last thing I'll say is, not unlike Valerie, one of the space kids who we did an interview because we couldn't find her, but she's on a lot of these tapes. Was this woman named Sharon. So, you know, Sharon with 2 R's. And like Valerie, you know, huge question mark. Everyone who knew her then was like, she was this very legitimate, real psychic. Puharich apparently would bring her around, show her off to people in government and academics, and just say, like, look what she can do. She can channel all this advanced information. He was always working with her. There's pictures of her. And she just disappeared. And everyone who knew her back then was like, you know, it would be amazing if you found her, because they're convinced that she was pulled into a, you know, Stranger Things Montauk project type project where like she was the real deal and she was sort of pulled into a project like that. That's why she's just kind of like wiped off the face of the earth. There's nothing about her anywhere. Again, I went to the great lengths to try to locate her. Nothing. People don't want to, like Valerie, they don't want to talk about her when you bring her up. So that was another example of like, okay, maybe there's some reality here, because it's just so bizarre. And like multiple space kids are like, yeah, I knew her well, and I wish we could find her. Like she was a friend of mine, and she disappeared.
Just like she was the whole program was a feeder maybe into something deeper. And
yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy stuff like that out there. But people think that Puharich's lab was that. So
does this add to your conviction? You know, I think even the makers of Stranger Things say that it's based off of, you know, the Montauk experiments. And I think it's pretty well established that there were some experiments in Montauk, Long Island. Does this add to your conviction that, I don't know, you hear all these things around gifted and talented education, you know, kids who have psi abilities being taken into secret national labs facilities, often associated with the Atomic Energy Commission or federally funded research and development centers like Battelle Memorial Institute and others. And, you know, they're told to, like, you know, how do you interact with this exotic piece of metal or, you know, pick a card or, you know, things like that. Does this add to your conviction that this was happening in sort of a widespread way?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Puharich himself, again, if you choose to believe, you know, what he says, he openly says, I helped locate these kids. He talks about it. I mean, he says, like, I was the person who would say, you know, yeah, this one checks out, and they would move on to wherever they would move on to. He talks about helping other countries with this, the UK. He said he traveled to the UK and helped them locate children with psi abilities. So it's all that gray area, you know.
Yeah, and you have to ask why this stuff is coming back into vogue. Like, you have the telepathy tapes top the podcast charts in the entire country.
Yeah.
And part of me thinks it's a beautiful, amazing thing. And obviously, in my opinion, I don't think it's all a psyop. I think that some of these autistic nonverbal children are actually, they do have really amazing abilities. It's unfortunate that some of them, like this woman that went on Danny Jones, I think are actually faking things. This is the mother of one of the kids, and she clearly was peeking past this blindfold, which is it's just so sad, and what a poor representation of, you know, again, what I think is an underlying real phenomena. But does it make you ask questions around why is all of this stuff coming back into vogue? It feels like if you were to take an index of aliens, psi, and psychedelics, and you were to you know, invest, like, say it's like a, you know, synthetic derivatives like an ETF or something. If you were to invest in this in the late 60s, early 70s, you'd like lose a lot of money into today. But now if you were to invest in these things 5 years ago or something, it just feels like they're all taking off. Like it feels like the trend is like, and are you cynical about that? Is there, I mean, maybe even to take that ETF analogy further, are there financial or corporate interests behind the repopularization of some of these things? Because a part of me is extremely idealistic about them coming out, because I do think it touches on kind of deeper architectures and nature of reality. And then there's another part of me where I'm like, it's got to be coming out now because of some military-industrial complex reason or something.
I don't know. I mean, I think, I certainly think this film is going to help, you know, put some pieces together about the history of all this stuff. And I think the fact that it's coming out now is interesting because of all this, you know, this resurgence of interest in it. But I know what you mean. I don't know. Like, I talked to a kid who claimed he was part of the GATE program, and I won't say his name, but now he's very vocal online about his involvement in that and what he did. And he wanted to talk to me because it was so similar to the stuff the space kids did that he read about. But I don't know what to believe, you know, with that. So it's just, I don't know. I'm in the same boat as you. I don't know what the motives may be, but I think that Puharich was certainly extremely important in this whole world. And the fact that there's never really been something like on him that's out there is exciting for me, obviously. So
yeah,
I think it'll raise some eyebrows.
Think so too. Raise some eyebrows, maybe ruffle some feathers, but you know, you're on the right path if you do that. But Greg, this is an honor, man. This is a lot of fun. One of my, honestly, like, I love information-dense podcasts, especially ones that are uncorrelated from other, I love the stories, I saw a thing and I was in the bed and I was in, they put a chip in me. Like, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But it's always hard to sense make after that. Like, how does this fit into some coherent tapestry of what's actually happening?
Yeah.
I love this interview because you just, to me, again, you added this big puzzle piece that seems to be missing as far as this whole story, and obviously begets 100 more questions. But I really hope everybody checks out the movie, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Head to AmericanAlchemyMerch.com to grab official American Alchemy merch and support the show directly. And while you're there, the Cowboy UFO tee is a fan favorite we always keep in stock, along with the Atomic Age design. Thank you all so much for following and supporting the show.